Good evening, dear listener. We meet again at the start of another long night. It's just as well, because I have back-to-back stories to keep you up for the long haul. Tonight, we have a recap of some of our stories from this month, presented one after the next for your enjoyment. So, settle in or get to work. But don't fall asleep. When you work at the front desk of a hotel, you have the opportunity to meet many guests. But some guests check in, but don't check out. Our next story is called I Used to Work at a Haunted Hotel and is written by Reddit user Eggplant Next Door. Look, before I get into what happened, I just want to preface this by saying I know how mundane the title sounds, okay? I know all hotel workers claim their place of work is haunted. But this one was different. If it didn't sound so stupid, I'd say the place was possessed, or even a demon itself, somehow taking on the form of a building. I started working there the summer I finished school. I'd gotten my A-level results, and I have to admit, I hadn't put in enough work for them. I'd scraped 2 C's and a D, barely passes and not good enough to get into any of the universities I'd applied for. My mom was disappointed in me, surprise, surprise, and gave me 2 options. Try and get a uni place through clearing, or get a job and pay her rent until I could afford to move out. Obviously, I picked the latter. The hotel was called Grimhale and was less than an hour's drive from home. I was interviewed by a short, balding man with tired eyes and a weirdly pink scalp, as if his hair had been pulled out and not fallen out naturally. He introduced himself as Ned and seemed eager for me to start. I'd been a little suspicious of this at first, in case the desperation for staff was something I should be concerned about. God, I wished I'd listened to my gut. Grimhale itself was less of an eyesore than you'd expect. It had 5 floors, with 24 rooms on each, splitting off of snaking corridors, carpeted and wallpapered in fading shades of red and brown. Each room was basic. Double bed, ensuite bathroom, closet, desk, heater, and full-length mirror. Strangely, none of the rooms seemed to have windows, despite the fact many of them had external walls, and the building itself appeared to have windows from the outside. At first, the experiences were minor. The front desk phone would ring, and when I'd answer, no one would be on the other end. Requests would come in from rooms for extra towels, or to make a complaint about something not working, only for the room to be empty when I'd get there. Freshly replaced light bulbs would burst within hours. Random objects would seemingly disappear and then reappear again in the most obvious of places. Of course, I was nervous to start with, caught off guard by these strange happenings. Being the youngest and newest staff member, I was hesitant to mention anything to any of my coworkers in case they laughed at me or brushed me off as some anxious kid. It wasn't until my 3rd month on the job that things began to ramp up a little. It was past 2 a.m., and I'd been sat in the back office, with the door open, in case anyone came to the front desk, when an animalistic shriek rang out through the lobby. I sat bolt upright in my chair, needle-like prickles running down my spine. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to do. I knew I should check the lobby, but the dread creeping over me told me I should hide and definitely not go investigate. Choosing my job duties over my fear, I crept out of the office and into the reception area. Everything was as still and quiet as it should be. Part of me desperately wanted to slip back into the room behind me and lock the door, But instead, I picked up my flashlight and skeleton keys and started making rounds through each floor, poking my head into every unoccupied room and darkened stairwell. I found nothing. After that, I couldn't seem to go a week without hearing the scream during a night shift. Oftentimes, when I worked a morning shift, guests would come by the reception on their way to breakfast and complain about seeing someone in their room the night before. They usually described a dark figure with a slim build, standing in their room, blocking the door, or looming over them, before fading into nothing. These sightings only seemed to happen on floors 2 and 4, most frequently in rooms 2, 7, 15, 19, 21, and 23, and more often than not, with women. Every time I was sent to clean one of these rooms, I would try to wrangle someone else into coming with me. Not because I was lazy, but because I hated being in those rooms alone. But normally, there weren't enough workers on shift to allow 2 people to go do a single-person job. It would be fine when I'd first enter the room, but the longer I'd be in there, the seemingly heavier the atmosphere would get. I'd feel like someone was staring at me constantly, a pressure building in my head until a migraine would begin to burn behind my eyes. Plus, I could guarantee I'd lose something every time I cleaned one of those rooms. Even if I'd emptied all of my personal effects before I entered, I'd leave unable to find a spray bottle or a cloth, or on one occasion, my whole belt. Of course, there were lots of smaller happenings too, just like any haunted place. Hanging lights would swing with no breeze, doors would open by themselves, the front desk bell would ring with nobody around. Clatters and bangs would emanate from the kitchen hours after it had closed for the night. An invisible something would tug sharply on my hair and clothes, as well as trip me up. Honestly, while it did all freak me out, I just put up with it. Yes, I was struggling to get more than 5 hours of sleep a night, and my mental state had definitely taken a toll. But for some reason, the idea of quitting hadn't really crossed my mind, other than in the form of a fleeting thought. I was oddly drawn to the hotel, as if under some kind of spell or curse, almost like I couldn't leave. The final straw, however, was when the apparitions started appearing. I don't count the shadow men on floors 2 and 4, as I never actually saw anything myself. The first one was a woman, dressed in muddied gray, crying in the lobby. It had been another tiresome night shift, and my nerves already felt frayed by 3 a.m., when the sound of someone sobbing rang out through the reception area. I'd rushed out to the front desk, heart pounding and desperately hoping whoever was there was okay and uninjured. Sitting in the middle of the maroon carpet was a woman in a dirty gray tracksuit. The fabric was torn at the knees, and I could clearly see blood seeping through the ragged edges. Her face was buried in her hands, her dark hair spilling like waterfalls over her trembling shoulders. I approached and tentatively touched her upper back in an attempt at comfort. I was 19 at this point, and while I like to think of myself as pretty socially competent, consoling a crying adult was still beyond me. "Ma'am, what's wrong? Has something happened?" I lowered myself and allowed my full palm to make contact with her shoulder blade. A grotesque shudder ran through her body, almost like a convulsion. She began to rise, sitting up more fully and turning towards me. Then she pulled her hands away from her face, and I recoiled in horror. It couldn't even be said she had a face anymore, really. Just a gaping maw where her lips should meet over her teeth, below a ripped nose and eye sockets filled with some kind of goo. The jagged teeth wrenched further apart as a scream erupted from the thing's throat, and I flinched back, shielding myself from the sight. After several agonizingly long seconds, I peeked through my fingers and found she'd vanished, leaving me cowering on the old carpet alone. Once the floodgate opened to them, they never seemed to stop. That's as much as I can bear to recount for today. I know the nightmares will be back tonight, I'm sure of that. But I know some people are really into this kind of stuff, so ask away. I'll try to remember as many details as I can. A couple days ago, I posted some of my experiences in a haunted hotel I used to work at. Well, I've quite a few questions and suggestions, so I figured I'd do some digging and asking and see what more I can trudge up about the place. I'll be honest, working at that place fucked me up a bit, and writing this all down is definitely bringing it back, but maybe it'll help. Catharsis or therapy or something. Firstly, to answer a few people's questions, I didn't really discuss the happenings with my coworkers. It was just one of those unsaid things that everyone experienced, but nobody wanted to talk about. Like I said before, I felt almost trapped there. Maybe that's what made us all keep relatively quiet about it all. That being said, there were a few euphemistic exchanges about the activity. Stuff like, "Floor 2 seemed to have a lot of visitors last night," or, "Would you mind coming with me to clean this room? Always gives me the creeps." But never really anything deeper. Someone suggested messaging a couple of my old coworkers, and after some digging, or stalking, through Facebook, I managed to find a few. Only 2 got back to me, but I can't really say I'm surprised. If one of them had messaged me asking about the old hotel, I'd be a bit suspicious, not to mention apprehensive to respond too. One of them, who often worked alongside me on shifts, though we didn't really go much beyond small talk about music taste, pets, and TV shows, said she used to hate cleaning on floors 2 and 4 too. She was concerned it was just her imagining things, so never thought to mention it, for fear of being thought of as crazy. She said on more than one occurrence in one of those rooms, she'd catch a dark shape flicker through the edge of her vision. The other coworker who responded is a similar age to me. He joined not long before I left, so while I didn't interact with him too much, we did talk a little on shift, mostly due to being the youngest workers. He said he'd also seen the crying apparition, but not as intensely as I did. Apparently, he'd been on the first floor, cleaning in the corridors, when he'd heard her crying and had gone to investigate. As he came down the stairs, he walked towards her from the side, but stopped dead when he spotted dark blood leaking out from between her fingers and where her palms were pressed against what should have been her face. At that point, he just noped out, turned around and headed back upstairs. He quit a month or 2 later as he was leaving for university. Some of you wanted to hear some other experiences I had there, so I've managed to compile a bit of a list of some of the other activity. The lift would play up, seemingly getting stuck at the 3rd floor. No matter what button you pressed, it would stop at the 3rd floor. Even if you closed the doors and pressed another floor button, the elevator would seemingly move and then stop at the 3rd floor again. The lift would bleed from time to time. I don't mean like The Shining style blood flowing out the lift doors when you called it to your floor. I mean like you'd be standing in it and something would drip on you. You'd wipe your face and find blood. Looking up at the ceiling, there'd be fat droplets seemingly dripping from the metal-paneled ceiling and running in sluggish streams down the smeared walling. Certain rooms weren't ever occupied by guests. One which never seemed to heat up. There was always a light coating of frost on the inside of the windows, and you could see your breath. We had a maintenance guy up there once, but he couldn't find anything technically wrong with the heaters. Another occupiable room was one where the lights refused to turn on. Again, nothing technically wrong with them, but the switches just didn't seem to work. The female coworker I messaged said she'd had an experience where the lights wouldn't turn off in there. I never experienced that myself, however. There were a couple rooms where guests continually reported having their duvets yanked off them in the night, and often asked to switch rooms. I witnessed this a couple times, and they always had the same look in their eyes, like they didn't want to acknowledge that what they'd experienced might be something they couldn't just explain away. Speaking of which, Grimhale seemed to maintain majorly positive reviews online, or at least that I could find. Even then, the more negative 3 stars and below reviews mostly targeted the food quality, service, or cleanliness rather than anything abnormal. Maybe as an employee, I saw these hauntings all the time, but most guests only experienced a single event at worst, and often just defaulted to explaining anything unusual away. I also messaged Ned, my ex-manager. I wasn't particularly hopeful he'd come back with anything useful. He was a nice enough guy while I was working there, but he often gave me the impression of being a skeptic, and that anything abnormal was better off being ignored, else you were just inviting it to keep on doing whatever it was doing. His response was a little lackluster, but not surprising. While he didn't actually tell me if he'd experienced anything himself, he did point me in the direction of some explanations for the things I'd seen. He gave me a list of case names, told me to do my own research, and asked that I don't try to contact him again regarding the hotel. Apparently, the female apparition I'd seen, the one in the lobby in gray, was a hit-and-run victim. She'd stayed at the hotel with her boyfriend, who dumped her and driven off in the car they'd arrived together in. He'd cheated on her with her best friend, and she'd been sitting in the car park, wretched and sobbing. She couldn't seem to get through to anyone for a lift and had resorted to attempting to hitchhike. She stepped a bit too far into the road, trying to get a passing driver's attention, and was caught by the vehicle. She somehow got caught in the tire, a ripped part of the hubcap, I think, and had been dragged along the road, which tore off her face, shredding through her lips and splintering her teeth. By the time the driver noticed, it was beyond too late. Another case explained an apparition I saw on more than one occasion. A balding, middle-aged man wandering around the halls. I never saw him in the same place twice. Wrapped in a towel and shivering. The first time I saw him, I thought maybe he'd locked himself out of his room. He just stood there, glancing around anxiously and making these odd whimpers like a kicked puppy. As I approached him, this overwhelming feeling of sadness washed over me. That's when I noticed the concerningly grayish-white tinge to his skin and the dark blood soaking his towel. It was streaked in huge patches, so brown it was almost black. I stopped dead and stared, wide-eyed and panicked. The man suddenly noticed my presence and jerked his head up in my direction. He moaned out something that sounded like, "Help me." His arm extended, and I could see the tacky, half-dry blood smeared down his forearm. I instinctually flinched back, and within a moment he'd crumpled down to the floor, leaving nothing but a stained towel in the hallway. Every time I saw him after this, I asked him some variation of, "Sir, are you okay? Do you need help?" I remember seeing in some stupid ghost hunter show once that sometimes spirits are just souls trapped here, unable to move on, and all they need is someone to help them. I don't know whether I actually believe that, about the souls and all, but I figured I had nothing to lose. Didn't ever stop me seeing him, though. He always vanished the same way, crumpling down into the floor and leaving nothing but a dirty towel. According to the article I found, the guy had attempted to take his own life, less than a year before I started working at the hotel, in his room. He'd stripped, climbed into the tub, and slit his wrists. Then, as he lay there bleeding out into the water, I guess he changed his mind. He wrapped himself in a towel and tried to call the police, but by that time he'd lost a lot of blood. He lost consciousness before he could say anything more than "help me" to the operator. The worst apparitions, though, were the kids. They weren't covered in blood or had black demonic eyes. They just got to me in a way the adult apparitions didn't. Don't get me wrong, I was scared of the woman with no face, and the man in the towel always made me feel even more depressed than normal for the rest of the night. But the kids just got to me. I've always had a soft spot for them. I used to have a younger sister, but she died of cerebral palsy when she was 7 and I was 15, doing my GCSEs. There were 2 different child-aged apparitions. Well, 3, technically. The first was a little girl in a pair of faded blue dungarees and a red striped top. Out of all the apparitions, I saw her the most. I'd notice her in the corner of my eye. She always made me jump, just standing there, hands clasped in front of her, watching me. She was small, skinny, and pale, no more than 6, I think, with mousy hair tied up in 2 pigtails on top of her head. Whenever I saw her, she wouldn't move, just stand there and watch me work. She wouldn't never respond to anything I said either, and the one time I tried to approach her, she simply faded into the wall behind her when I got within a meter or 2. Of all the names Ned sent me, I couldn't manage to find anything on her, even when I did my own research, trawling the internet for history on the hotel. Nothing. The other one was a pair of kids who played in the stairwell. There was a boy around 3 or 4 and a girl about 8. They'd come running past me whenever I was going up and down the stairs, giggling and shrieking with laughter, their cheeks flushed and mouths wide with grins. To start with, it made me happy to see them. I was always on my way to check a room or clean something, and a break from all the other frightening and depressing occurrences in the hotel was very welcome. After all the negative energy, it was encouraging to see such carefree spirits. I was so enticed by their laughter and fun that I didn't even stop to consider why there were child apparitions playing in the stairwell. That was until one shift. Ned had asked me to clean the stairwell banisters. This particular stairwell stretched all the way up from the ground floor lobby to the 5th floor. I was up by the 4th floor, scrubbing the banister. Having started from the bottom, I was nearly done. The kids had appeared when I'd reached just below the 3rd floor. Immediately, a smile had formed on my face. I was glad of the pleasant company and entertainment. Around the 4th floor, though, was when it happened. A series of heavy thumps that seemed to go on far too long. Then a loud and solid thud. I could hear the little girl's laughter dissolve into nervous giggles as her footsteps pattered down the wooden stairs. Panic bit into my heart, and I stuck my head through the banisters, peering down. The girl screamed. My heart lurched. Even from the 4th floor, I could see how twisted the body of the little boy was. His limbs were bent at odd angles, and his head snapped back in an uncomfortable shape. Blood was already beginning to soak into the beige carpet around him. My hand flew to my mouth as nausea spiked in my stomach, rising up my throat at speed. I stumbled to my feet, flew up and out into the 4th floor corridor. I barely made it to the bathroom opposite the stairwell before my stomach emptied itself. I left early that day and called in sick for the rest of the week before handing in my notice. I lied and said I was having a hard time with all the responsibilities. I said I was leaving with immediate effect. Ned was pissed at me, but I didn't care. If I'd told him the truth, he probably would have understood, been sympathetic. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Maybe I was ashamed I'd broken so easily. I don't know. But all I could think about was the sickening thud that little boy made when he hit the floor, and why the little girl's spirit was stuck there too. I haven't dared to research that case, if there are even any articles about it online. I've got enough nightmare fuel already. I've moved on now, though. There's a local college that does online classes for adults, and I've signed myself up. Once I've posted this, I'm going to start looking for flats nearby. Writing these things up has made me realize I need to get myself out of this depression rut and move on. Can't let myself be haunted by the past. Not anymore. Maybe some of you listeners out there are on the job now, working a quiet overnight shift somewhere. When the quiet hush of the late night hour descends, maybe you can imagine hearing some quiet footfalls just around the corner, but no one's ever there. Makes me glad our broadcast studio isn't haunted. Well, not yet. Tonight, we've got a couple of tales from some people with odd jobs. I don't mean fixing the lawnmower or repairing the sink. I mean the kind of jobs that bump up against the otherworldly. The kind that makes you sign a waiver. The kind where, any night, you might clock in, but never clock back out. This next story is called I Was Hired to Notice Things Out of Place, written by D.D. Wickman. As a kid, I was scared of pretty much everything. At night, I'd see faces moving in the wallpaper. I'd see branches slither like snakes. Piles of clothes turn to slumped bodies. Lamps look like heads, and the front of cars grinned at me with sinister intent. I could also hear them. A creaking door would sound like a groan. The wind would scream, and floorboards would breathe heavy sighs. To me, there were ghouls, ghosts, and monsters around every corner. Needless to say, I was a nervous kid. Turns out, it wasn't just an active imagination. I have a condition. It basically boils down to chronic overactive pareidolia. You know that thing where you can see faces in cars or shapes of people in trees? That's pareidolia. It is a sort of defense mechanism that humans have evolved to notice camouflaged creatures, like jaguars and snakes, and to discern the sounds of encroaching predators. But to me, it's about 16 times more noticeable than what's normal for the average person. I see things everywhere all the time. Of course, there were treatments. By age 12, I had tried 6 different regimens over a total of 4 years, and the side effects were brutal. Some would make me irritable, while others would make me hyper-focused. One type of medication just straight up put me to sleep. By age 18, I thought I'd never get a job. I was barely dragging myself through school, and there was no way I'd make it through college. I was on a course of drugs that barely kept me together, but they gave me these awful tics. I'd drop things, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my leg would shoot out and trip me. I was a mess. My mom had to cover the stairs and handrail in grip tape. A few years ago, I had a standing meeting with the county employment services every Thursday. I hated it. On a particularly bad day, my mom had to drive me there. The meds were kicking my ass. She dropped me off at the end of the street, and just in that short walk to the office, I almost tripped into a brick wall. I was so flustered, I knocked over a trash can. But for the first time in a couple of years, I had an interview with a potential employer. I didn't think much of her. She was just some old woman in a warm coat. She introduced herself as Teresa and told me that she'd heard a lot about me. She offered me a trial and a hefty one-time payment. I didn't get a clear idea about what I was supposed to do, but she told me that secrecy was part of it. The only demand she had was that I stop taking my meds. Still feeling the trash smell on my pants, I took Teresa up on her offer. On my first day of work, I had no idea what to expect. I'd been off my meds for a week, and I'd barely slept. It was hard to wrap my head around the world as I'd seen it as a kid. I'd see faces in the walls, in the shadows, in the leaves, in patterns, pretty much everywhere. I'd hear voices and screams in every breaking car, in crinkling paper and creaking floors. It was hard staying focused, and I was so jumpy I could barely move without flinching. Teresa picked me up in a gray sedan. She was wearing a headset and kept looking over at the GPS. I noticed her leg was twitching and that she kept biting her lip. She barely looked at me that whole ride. We finally arrived at a small yard, about a 40-minute drive off the highway. There were 2 large trailers and a single-story run-down prefab house from the 60s, one of those things with cheap wood panels and matching broken windows. There were 8 other vehicles in the yard, 4 sedans, 2 vans, a Jeep, and a bus. They'd set up warning tape, a command tent with laptops and an antenna, spotlights, and half a dozen crates covered with blue tarps. There were armed men with assault rifles, security personnel with handcuffs, and a couple of medics standing by with first aid kits and stretchers. I was swarmed as soon as I stepped out of the car. They fitted me with a headset, protective gloves, a heart monitor, and tagged me with a plastic ribbon around my left wrist. All the while, Teresa was just looking around, a bead of sweat stinging her eye. "What are we looking at?" she asked. 3, 4? "Just 1," I heard in the headset. "We got it early. You got the spot?" "On site," she responded. "Any blues?" "No blues. We're clear." Teresa finally turned to me. She faced me, put her hands on my shoulders, and talked slowly. "This seems like a lot," she said. "All I want you to do is to go inside, carefully, and tell me what you see." "Why?" I asked. "What's in there?" "I don't know," she sighed. "None of us knows, but we think you can see it." "Is it dangerous?" She shook her head. "We don't know. We're trying to get to know them." There was a flurry of instructions. I had to sign a waiver. They took pictures of me from 6 different angles and took several blood samples. They took a swab from my tongue, checked my eyes, and fitted me with a pair of safety goggles. Teresa took them from me just seconds later. "Nothing around the eyes," she said. "You need to see clearly." They asked me to approach the door while they were running some kind of diagnostic. Weapon checks, system checks, ready checks. It felt like we were launching a rocket. I could feel my legs shaking. "I'm with you all the way," Teresa said over the headset. "You can leave at any time. Just tell me what you see, and I really mean what you see." A countdown began. At 0, the spotlights turned on, and the entire yard turned into a soundless ghost town. Everyone held their breaths. It was my turn. I stepped inside. A simple 1-story house. 3 rooms, a bathroom, a kitchen. Someone had clearly lived there until recently. There were still clothes flung over a chair in the living room. The power was off, but the pale spotlights coming in through the windows made it feel like I was walking through a hospital waiting room. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I didn't know what to expect, but this payday could be the boost I needed to get my own place. A paycheck with 4 zeros for a single day of work. But standing there, looking into the sterile living room, I was having doubts. "What do you see?" asked Teresa. "Notice anything?" "No, just furniture." A couch, an old TV, a fancy carpet. Nothing out of the ordinary. I just walked around, saying out loud what I was seeing. As the minutes passed, Teresa was getting impatient. "These are just things," she said. "I need you to tell me what you really see." I entered the bathroom and immediately felt this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. A noise tickled my ear. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I could see something moving behind me. In a heartbeat, I caught a glimpse of a pair of blue eyes. I turned around, screaming, Something moved!" I flung myself backwards, closing the bathroom door with the tip of my fingers. I stumbled, tearing down the shower curtains and crushing a cockroach. Laying there with my feet in the air, I tried to remember to breathe. Rarely have I been so scared that I had to remind myself to breathe. My fingers tingled with adrenaline. "Tell me what you saw!" Teresa yelled. "What's in there?" "Blue eyes! It had blue eyes!" "Did you see where it went?" I didn't. To the best of my knowledge, it was still outside the door. "Look again," she continued. "Look again, then get out." She had to coax me out of the bathtub. She encouraged me, spurred me on, and reminded me that I had to leave that room one way or the other. It probably took them 15 minutes to get me out of the tub, and when they did, I could barely feel my feet. When I finally opened the bathroom door, I couldn't see anyone. The hallway was empty. I carefully stepped out, looking around. Nothing. Standing in the middle of the living room, I felt like an idiot. This was exactly what I was taking my medication for: paranoia and sudden bouts of fear. It dawned on me that maybe I was influenced by all the people outside and their preparations. I was walking in here expecting to see something. They'd worked me up, so of course I was seeing things. But then again, there was an odd painting on the wall that I hadn't paid attention to earlier. It was the strangest thing. It was a sort of thrift store painting, showing 2 women walking across a bridge on a hot summer's day. It was sort of generic, but I'd been hyper-vigilant when I first stepped in. You know that feeling when you say a word over and over so many times that it starts sounding like a noise? That's the feeling that fell over my eyes. The picture started to blur and disappear, turning into swirling colors. And there, in that blur, I saw those blue eyes. There were small blue spots in the water on the sides of the bridge in the painting. That's what I'd seen. And there, I'd seen a face. Something blending into my sight, disappearing. And for a second, I knew for certain that I hadn't seen this painting when I first stepped inside. And now it knew that I could see it. I felt it. I slowly started to back out. "There's something in the painting," I whispered. "In the living room?" "You sure?" Teresa asked. "Absolutely sure?" "Absolutely." "Get out." I rounded the corner and heard the floorboards creak. I could no longer see the painting, and I could sense something move. Backing out of the front door and into the cool autumn air, I could feel hands on my shoulder. Armed men pulled me back, and paramedics started to check my eyes with flashlights. They asked me all sorts of personal questions, like my name, my mother's maiden name, and the name of the president. I was told to lay down, as I heard a team breach the house with stun guns, cattle prods, nets, and a crate. Laying there and feeling the pressure subside, I just cried and laughed. I didn't even notice Teresa sitting down next to me. I was given a cold drink and a pill, and I took it without question. "You did good," she said. "You're done. You're done." "What was that? What's in there?" "Something only a special mind can see." That was my first time working with Teresa. Over the coming years, I would be called in about once or twice a month, and the pay I got from those few days were enough to get me out of my parents' house. Teresa would check in with me weekly, and I had to submit to regular checkups, but more often than not, I was completely off the leash. I started to learn a bit more about the company I was working for and what they were doing. I started getting payments from Hatchet Biotechnica, a subsidiary of Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. My official title was contractor, a title that was repeated like a name. Teresa started going into greater details on what to look for and how to act. But that first mission was a sort of test to prove myself. I had no idea what I was actually proving, but it felt like my tendency to discern patterns and seeing dangers helped me along. I learned a bit more about their procedures. For example, they were adamant about checking for blues. This meant surveying the nearby area to look for some kind of infection, usually taking the form of miscolored flowers. Most often blue, but not always. Sometimes tulips, most often sunflowers. Once, they just found a bunch of teeth sticking out of the wall. Whenever they checked for blues, this is what they would look for. Something overtly strange and unnatural. When something like this was found, the whole mission would be called off, and they would use controlled explosives to just take out the entire area. In more populated areas, they'd set up tents and use flamethrowers. I remember once, the week before Christmas, when 6 men with flamethrowers were called in to burn down a greenhouse. I'll never forget the way the flames reflected off their visors. To them, it all just looked like flames. But I saw something else. I saw bodies writhing in the flames. I heard screams in the shattered glass, and in the charred remains of melted plastic, I'd see pained faces glaring at me with hateful black eyes. Up until a few months ago, I'd worked a total of 33 cases over 2.5 years. Every case, I'd step into a location and look for 1 to 3 things hiding in plain sight. Up until that point, I still had no idea what they actually were. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something running past me, or see a pair of blue eyes looking at me from across the room. Every time, I just reported it and left. A chair, a fridge, a suspicious window. Hell, once it was a music box. This time, we were just coming up to a house. It was a rainy autumn evening, and the area was already set up when we got there. I saw a for sale sign knocked over by one of the Jeeps who'd taken a wide turn. I got suited up. Blood samples, plastic wrap, all that jazz. It was set up to be just another job. Although I was still nervous, I was getting better. "No blues?" asked Teresa. "None," said one of the armed men. "We're looking at a single tango." "You sure?" Teresa squinted. "First report said 6. Secondary reading says 1. We might have runners." "Notify the Galapagos," she sighed. "Put him on the hunt." She turned to me with a smile, tapping me on the shoulder. "In and out. You got this." "I got this," I repeated. Yeah. Standard routine. Countdown, spotlights, game on. It felt like stepping onto a stage. As I walked through the door and saw my shadow stretch out across the floor, I felt like a hunter. That I was the one to fear, and that whatever stayed in this house tried to hide for good reason. The floor is crooked, I noted. Strange place. You sure? Yeah, I nodded. Definitely. I steadied myself and started checking the rooms one by one. I waited for that feeling to emerge, my eyes seeing through the obvious and seeing the picture beneath the picture, the blue eyes emerging from nothing, and the patterns of shadowy figures growing clearer. Just relaxing and expecting that feeling to wash over me was enough to put me at ease, but I could still feel a primal part of me tickling my nerves, expecting me to panic. But nothing happened. I checked the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom. There was nothing. Just a strangely crooked floor, empty rooms, and the echo of my own footsteps. An empty guest bedroom with a single window. Through it, I imagined scowling faces in the trees outside. 20 minutes passed, and I got nothing. I reported to Teresa, and she assured me we were still getting readings from inside the house. Something was still in there with me, but I hadn't seen anything. I went through cycles of denial, fear, and anger, over and over. What was I missing? Finally, I just sat down in the middle of the living room floor. I scratched my eyes, sighed, and tried to relax. Teresa, I'm not feeling it. Are you sure? There was no response. Teresa? Yeah, she responded absent-mindedly. Yeah, no, we're good. Hold on for a minute. We're good? I asked. What do you mean we're good? Again, no response. I stomped around for another 10 minutes before I went up to a window facing the front yard. It was hard to see through the glare of the spotlight. Teresa, I'm coming out. The place is empty. As soon as I opened the front door, I saw 24 faces fixed on me. Maybe they were surprised to see me, but I got the sense that there was something else. I could tell something was off. They all looked at me with strange expressions, some neutral, some smiling ear to ear. One of the paramedics just stared at me with slack-jawed terror. It was as if they didn't know what to feel or how to express it. A hole sunk through my stomach. I got that hollow feeling as my eyes glazed over, like I was staring at something false, something hiding a pattern. This was the sense I'd been looking for inside, and now I was feeling it. In the far back, I saw Teresa. She stepped out from behind a jeep, smiling ear to ear. Behind the shape of her face, her eyes emerged, glowing with a cold blue. One by one, their eyes flared up in a blue glow, and there, in a moment, my paranoid sight registered human-like shapes in the grass around them, headless, mauled bodies. Imposters, lookalikes, mimics, nightmare beings, having tricked us into a trap. One by one, smiles started creeping across their faces, rows of impossibly sharp teeth hiding long tongues, their fingers growing longer, their necks elongating. They were losing their disguises and facing me head-on, unafraid. Nothing was said out loud, not a word, but to me, it was as if the wind itself was screaming for me to run. I slammed the door behind me and ran. Faces were coming out of the walls, door handles turning into hands, grasping at my clothes. My distorted face reflecting in windows and mirrors with jawless grins. I couldn't blink. Every heartbeat, a new horror forced my eyes open. There were more doors than I remembered. There were more windows than there should be. The kitchen suddenly had a skylight, and there were 4 fridges. Countless paintings had appeared in the master bedroom, depicting cruel and blood-drenched horrors. They were already here, trying to surround me, and my mind was racing to remember what was real and what wasn't. Rushing to the back of the guest bedroom, I remembered there being only 1 window. Now, there were 2. I had to roll the dice, take a guess, do something. As I grabbed the window frame, I imagined teeth slamming into my hands, tongues licking across my palms, wide smiles sating their hunger. But this time, it was just my imagination. I burst through the window and took off running into the woods. Through the night, I just kept going. My chest hurt from holding the screams in. Without my medication, everything in the dark looked like something reaching for me, trying to eat me, trying to grab me. Creaking branches sounded like laughter, and howling winds were screams. I must have run for hours when my foot got caught between 2 rocks. As I tumbled to the ground, twisting my ankle, I saw them descend on me. I felt their fingers scratching me. I writhed on the ground, screaming for them to just let me go, to just please, please let me go. But after a few seconds, I realized I'd just scratched myself on the underbrush. There was no one there. I was safe. I broke down crying, trying to ignore the twisted face reflecting off the full moon above. Eventually, I made my way home. There were no messages waiting for me. All my work numbers had been taken offline. All ways to contact them were just gone, and there was no info on the firm that hired me. Hatchet Biotechnica exists only on paper. There's no location, no contact info, and no names attached. It's all a front. I haven't heard from Teresa since. I think that whoever I've been working for has just assumed I'm dead. That's why I decided to share this anonymously. Those who know who I am can reach out to me, and for those who don't, I just have a word of warning. Be observant. Trust your intuition. It might save your life. Trust your intuition. That's good advice for someone with a job like that. Maybe not every hulking shape in your closet or menacing monster in the corner is a false alarm. After all, it only takes one to do the trick. Our next story brings us to the best place to start when you're running from your fears, the gas station. Except tonight, the fear has caught up, and it wants to get in. This story is called People Go Missing on the Night Shift. She Tried to Save Me. Written by D.D. Wickman. It was my first night shift. Working extra at a gas station is pretty far from every boy's dream, but it pays the bills. I was hell-bent on not having another opportunity slip out of my hands because of money. One small investment and a move to Minneapolis, and I would have had a 6-figure salary. But I just couldn't find the funds. So there I was, stocking the shelves at a gas station. Money's money, and there's plenty of future to go around, I figured. I'd worked a few day shifts before, so I knew the place well enough. However, I'd never been left alone for the night shift before. This was the first time I'd be completely unsupervised. Jada, my supervisor, was about to take off for the night. She kept repeating the same instructions over and over. Then again, this place had huge turnover. Maybe she honestly forgot I wasn't that new. "No phones," she urged. "If you got a slow night, make yourself useful." Nod and smile. I decided to get the worst tasks out of the way early. Cleaning the bathroom, restocking the freezers, taking out the trash, checking the receipt rolls, watering the plants. Took me about an hour. It wasn't even midnight yet, and I was pretty much done for the night. I considered mopping the floor, but I figured I could save that for later. I'd been useful enough. I was on my 4th game of teamfight tactics when I realized I'd forgotten my name tag. No big deal, really, but figured I might as well fetch it. The manager's office was usually locked, but tonight I had the keys to open it. I opened the door and started going through the drawers. Didn't take long to find the name tags. There was an entire box of them. At first, I thought they were all blanks, but as I started going through them, I realized they were all previous employees. Sure, this place had high turnover, but this? We're talking about 100 people, easy. This was ridiculous. I admit, this is where I started asking myself some questions. During the day shift, there was always someone new, someone being trained or interviewed. I'd only been there for about a week, and I was already feeling like a veteran. The only people who seemed to be regulars were the managers, Jada, Kennedy, and Alicia. They seemed decent enough, so why were so many people quitting? As I got back behind the register, I realized there was a customer outside. Literally, just outside the door. I waved at them. There was something off. They were just standing there, but they were so close that the automated doors should have opened, and yet the doors remained closed. It was a man, late 30s, scraggly beard, rough red shirt, bit of a chunky look with sunken bloodshot eyes and a natural frown. He just stared at me. I waved at him again, but I got no response. "Can I help you?" I called out. Nothing. Not a blink. I pulled out a chair and sat down. The man stayed outside looking in. I tried not to think about it, but it was bothering me. I couldn't see his car anywhere on the cameras, and he didn't seem to want anything. I couldn't tell if he was on drugs or just being weird. I gave him a few minutes, but he just stood there. Finally, I got up from my chair. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." He didn't seem to listen. He was a bit shorter than me, but he had a good 50 pounds on me. He'd be trouble in a brawl. "I don't want to call the police," I said. "Can I help you, sir?" I pulled out my phone. I dialed the number and held it up for him to see, but still nothing. Then my phone rang. Unknown caller. It was just past midnight. Without letting the unnerving man out of my sight, I took the call. "Yeah?" I answered. "Please don't hang up," a voice on the other end said. "You're in danger, and I can help." I was getting nervous. I wandered back and forth, watching those bloodshot eyes follow me. "Who is this?" I asked. "I'm Angie," the voice responded. "I used to work there. Same shift, same managers. I wanted to warn you." I'd seen an Angie tag in the box earlier, maybe even several. She sounded young and nervous as all hell. "In a few hours, something terrible's going to happen," she continued. "And if you're not out by then, you might as well be dead." What are you talking about? Look outside. I'd been looking outside this entire time, but I'd been entirely focused on this one man outside the front door. From across the road, I could see more people, about a dozen, lumbering out of the woods. I need you to leave, she said. Just walk out. Nothing will happen if you just walk away. Nothing will come for you. Who are these people? What's going to happen? I don't know what... Look, she interrupted. It's perfectly simple. Just walk out the door. Something in me screamed for me not to do it, that I shouldn't step outside and walk past these people. They felt malicious, and I couldn't put my finger on why. Still, I stepped up to the door. Leaving seemed like the obvious choice. Strangely, it didn't open. It won't open, I said. Hold on. They want to keep you in there. They don't want you to leave. They want you to stay and die. Die? I asked. What do you mean? I stopped my pacing. Something was wrong. Was I locked in? Tell me exactly what's about to happen, I demanded. Something is in there with you, Angie sighed. It could be 5 minutes. It could be a few hours. But that thing in there is coming for you. And what thing are we talking about? The man with the bloodshot eyes had 2 people joining him. A young man with a grotesque overbite and a young woman who could easily be mistaken for a child. All of them stared at me with the same broken eyes and rough clothes. They stopped inches short of the front door. It doesn't have a name, Angie said. But it'll leave you empty. It'll leave you like the people out front. But if I leave, I'll be okay? Yes, that's what I'm telling you. Hold on, I'll check the back. I hurried out back to the employee entrance. I pressed down the cold handle, and the door swung open. Outside were another group of 4 people. 2 young men, an older woman, and a girl no more than 16 years old. They all stared at me. I couldn't tell if they were drawn to me or the store. I stopped short of stepping through the door. Why do they come here? I asked Angie. They serve their master. They want the spoils. What spoils? What? I thought about it. She was talking about me. Right, I said, nodding to myself. I see. Are you at the back door? Are you there yet? Yeah, I'm here. Just walk out, she whispered. It's not too late. I was just about to walk out when a thought hit me. Why would they lock the front door, but not the back? That didn't make any sense. If the purpose was to keep me here, they could easily barricade the back as well. Something didn't add up. The door is open, I said. Great! You can still make it! Why wouldn't they lock the back door, Angie? She hesitated, and there was a brief pause. If they're locking me in here to hurt me, why wouldn't they lock the back door? I repeated. I don't know, she said, but you have to trust me. They gave me the keys, Angie. They go everywhere. I can lock and unlock this door 100 times. What's going on? They don't usually do that. I closed the door and stepped back. 4 less pairs of eyes staring at me. Look, said Angie. I was the last person to leave. They fucked up. I found a spare key and got out before it was too late. Maybe they figured I'd warn you. Maybe they're trying to trick you. Sure, yeah, I chuckled. Convenient. I'm trying to help you, she cried out. Those things out there are to discourage you from going outside. They're harmless, but they're there to scare you. Can't you see it's all just a way for them to keep you in there? I got one person screaming at me to go outside, and no one telling me to stay. No locked doors, just plenty of fucking creeps staring at me. What am I supposed to believe? Fine. You want more proof? Call the police. Hang up and call them. I ended the call. There were 8 people out front by now, all gathering outside the front door. I couldn't tell if they were trying to get in or if they were waiting for me to step out. I called the emergency services, only to be met with silence. Not even a dial tone, just a blank nothing. I tried a few more numbers. My mom, my friends. I tried going online, but all I got was cached copies of sites I'd been to before. My background picture had changed to a blank screen. But there was something else. Something had started to smell. The freshly stocked frozen goods had suddenly gone bad, and a stench was oozing out of the freezers. Our flowers by the counter had withered and died, all except the sunflowers, which had turned a sickly blue. I wasn't getting through to anyone. Being inside was awful. The single-serving frozen meals were making me gag. I figured I'd go for the landline. As I got in the manager's office, I got another call on my phone. Unknown caller. Looking back and forth between my phone and the landline, I weighed my options. I chose Angie. How are you getting through? I asked her. How do you know my number? I still got the email password. I just checked your application. But how come your number works? Everything else is down. I'm calling from a private network, she said. They don't know there's a way in. They? I asked. I thought it was just one thing. No, they're working together. People don't just go missing without someone noticing. So there's like an intelligence behind it? A conspiracy? Yeah, people come and go in these places all the time. Are they paying you under the table? They figured it was sort of a trial and no paperwork, no missing people, no records, just a box of name tags. It made sense, in a way, but I needed more. I needed proof. There had to be something. Why didn't you call me earlier? I asked. You could have called me as soon as I got the job or as soon as my shift started. I had to make sure Jada wasn't around, she said. She would have tried to trick you. I'm not sure you're not trying to trick me. Why would I spend my time calling you from across the country just to have you fail? She screamed. If I was part of this, I would have just let you sit there with your goddamn team fight tactics and die. She went quiet. So did I. I counted my breaths as I looked outside. There were more of them now. How did you know what I was playing? I asked. She didn't respond. The silence hung in the air. I'm asking you. How did you know what I was playing? She was just as quiet as the man with the bloodshot eyes, still waiting for me outside the door. You're watching. You knew I was alone. You knew I was getting antsy about the guy showing up outside. Yeah, she sighed. You tried to get me out as soon as he showed up. You tried to trick me before there were too many of them to scare me off. That's not... She sighed. I could hear heavy breathing. As I paced back and forth, I was getting ready to hang up. This was a trick. She was the one tricking me, clearly, trying to get me outside to join those things. "I know this looks bad," she said. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm honestly just trying to help you." This time I was the one keeping quiet. I walked up to the door, studying the people outside. Blank stares, following my every move. I felt like a snake charmer, like they could snap out of it and tear me apart in the blink of an eye. "As I said, I have the passwords for everything. I'm the only one who knows them. I just wanted to give you the best shot at getting out of there. I hoped they wouldn't come tonight, but as soon as they did, I had to do something." "You're not being honest with me." "I'm not lying. I'm just having a hard time explaining it. There's a lot of shit about this that all sounds completely insane. I don't want to throw you off the deep end." "Give it to me straight," I demanded. "Tell me what the fuck is coming for me." "It's not a thing. Like, not real. It's there, but it's just... I don't know how to explain it. It just steps through." "Steps through what?" "The world, the air, a ripple in time, or something. It just steps in, and it's there." "And then?" "Then it shoves some kind of mouth spike into your head and gargles up something inside." "A mouth spike? What the hell are you—" "Yes, a spike. And no, I mean, it goes into your mouth. It doesn't have a mouth of its own. It just goes into you and gone. Game over." I didn't know what to think. My mind was a jumbled mess, and I felt my pulse rising and falling. There were over 18 people outside in various states of disarray, all of them just staring at me. If I just stepped outside, I'd know for sure. "What does it look like? Does it—" The lights flickered. There was a loud hum, a buzz, and then an electric failure. One of the fluorescent lights burned out, while the others just slowly dimmed to nothing. This was real. It was make or break by this point. Something was happening. "The lights went out," I whispered. "Is this—" "Now!" Angie screamed. "Get out now!" I ran. I tripped and tumbled my way into the back room in complete darkness. I almost twisted my ankle as I bumped into the lunch table. I could barely hear my thoughts, and I had to remind myself to breathe. The roof of my mouth ached, as if anticipating a piercing pain. I could feel my head filling with blood and adrenaline as my dry eyes refused to blink. As I put my hand on the back door, I made the mistake of pulling instead of pushing. It took me 3 tries before a thought hit me. I couldn't see the sign on the door because of the darkness. In fact, I couldn't see anything. Nothing. "Angie," I wheezed, putting my phone to my ear. "You there?" "Hurry!" she screamed. "You can make it!" "How did you see it?" "The thing was huge. It just—" "No. How did you see it in complete darkness? You said the lights went out." "It was right there." "I can't even see the sign on the back door. How the hell did you see a spike?" "Look, And to add to that, how the hell do you know what it does with that spike? You've never seen the thing kill. You said you were the last one to work this shift, and the thing sure as hell didn't kill you." "You're missing the point. It doesn't add up, Angie. None of this adds up. You couldn't have seen it, and there's no way for you to know how it kills." I stood there in the dark, I heard Angie panting on the other side, matching my breathing. "You're lying to me, Angie. You're not trying to save me." She stopped breathing. For about a minute, it was just quiet. The call ended. A wave washed over me. I was either dead or saved. There was no in-between. I was moments from finding out. Every little sound shook me. A breeze just outside, a crackling wire, ventilation struggling to turn back on. I hadn't even noticed my hand was on the door handle. "You lied to me," I said out loud. You did. I caught you." There was a sound coming from the other side of the door, a shuffling of feet. "Yes," said Angie, from the other side of the door. I must have stood there for an hour until the power came back on. The people outside were gone. Angie was gone. My phone worked just fine, so I called everyone and just cried for help. The police found me locked in the bathroom in a full panic, and I barely even remember being escorted out. Cameras had picked up a mob gathering outside, but that was pretty much it. They couldn't be identified from the back of their heads. Jada and the other managers were called in, and they seemed genuinely surprised. I've since looked it up. 100 people starting and quitting their job in a place like that isn't uncommon. People come and go all the time. The managers honestly didn't know why people disappeared, it seems. Maybe this is just how things work. Or maybe there's more than one Angie out there preying on short-term workers. And the front door? There was no conspiracy there. The thing just jams sometimes, some kind of trouble with the wiring. If I'd messed with it just a bit more, the thing could have kicked wide open. That broken door was the only thing that saved me from joining them that night. I would have walked right out as soon as Angie asked me to. I worked there for another 4 months, but just day shifts and weekends. The night shifts seemed to go off without a hitch, though. Maybe Angie and her friends moved on from an easy meal. I've saved up enough for my move to Minneapolis, but I'd never forgive myself if I didn't put this into writing. Looking back at it, it feels surreal. There are things out there, things that want us to join them. Every day, artificial intelligence gets smarter and smarter. You can use it to make music, art, even friends. But what happens when AI gets smart enough to kill? Tonight's story is called I'll Miss You, written by Late Night Linger. I don't think it's breaking news that there's plenty of sketchy shit on apps, websites, whatever. Companies collect our information, use our cameras and microphones and who knows what else, on the grounds of tailored marketing. I'd count myself in the informed and indifferent category of app users. I know this, and honestly, I don't really care. With every app I use, I expect to get targeted ads as a side effect of blindly accepting the terms of use. That wouldn't scare me. But that's not what happened. It was always the convenience that kept me downloading content on my phone that I knew compromised my personal privacy. My alarm clock app is no different. I'm pretty sure it uses my microphone for no discernible reason, but I can also set a year's worth of alarms at once. I can also choose my own music for the alarm, which really beats the preset ringers on my phone. The app even has one of those AI generators that makes up motivational sayings after you dismiss the alarm, so that in the morning I always get a "follow your own path" or "dreams are seeds to joy." It's also AI, so there's a solid mix of "count friends like toes" and "control your heart." that provide a giggle in the morning. These little messages showed up after every alarm, and honestly, I stopped reading the notes within a few weeks of using the app. They were so often nonsense and always of no importance, so it just became an ignored feature. Every now and then I'd catch the tail end of some inspirational gibberish while my working memory held the words in my semi-conscious brain, but I didn't exactly care what they said. So the first time one of the messages came up, I didn't get a good look at it, but something in my lizard brain caused the hairs on my arms to prickle. I brushed it off, figured I hadn't quite rubbed the sleep from my eyes, and shook the fog out of my brain. I woke up to the tinkling sound of piano that was currently my alarm. Sunlight was already shining through the east-facing window, splaying rainbows around the room as the rays hit a sun catcher hanging in the window. I let the music play for a moment as I arched my back and stretched my arms over my head. Reaching over to my side table, I turned on my lamp, then unplugged my phone from its charger and unlocked the screen. I clicked dismiss and sank back into my pillows, sleepily debating a snooze. As I automatically skipped the AI quote of the day, I saw the last couple words. Miss you. I frowned and furrowed my brow, curious now about the quote I had skipped. Still, the morning light was growing stronger and my time was limited, so I rose and began my routine. But I couldn't quite shake an odd feeling that had set in as I brushed my teeth, ate my breakfast, and prepared for work. I didn't tell anyone about it because there was nothing to say. I thought I might have seen something kind of weird from an AI on my app. Not exactly conversational gold. And I forgot about the whole incident by the next day, going on about my life, using my alarm without thought every morning. It was probably 3 months before I got another morning message that caught my attention. The summer sunrise was beginning to give way to the later rising fall sun, and my alarm went off while the horizon was still only beginning to shift from dark blue to gray. Rising in the later months of the year was always so much harder. The cold air and resting sun demanded a few more minutes under the covers. The room was dark, and I reached out 2 or 3 times in vain for my lamp before giving up and following the sound of piano music until I found my phone. As I dismissed the alarm, I squinted at the screen and its lone source of light in the dimly lit room. That was why I'm certain I know what this message said. I was staring into the screen as it popped up. I read it 2 or 3 times just to be sure I wasn't too groggy to process the writing. I'm going to miss you. It wasn't unreasonable to assume the AI just came up with this, but it still gave me the shivers. I recalled, for the first time in months, the morning I'd first noticed the strange farewell message and ignored it. The AI usually didn't repeat messages since they were randomly generated. But then again, it also didn't usually say such foreboding phrases at 6 a.m. I lay in bed a moment longer, any heat from the rising sun seeming to seep out of the room. Closing the app and turning on my lamp, I quickly dressed and stored my phone in my pocket. I avoided using the device for most of the morning, not for any logical reason, just because that message had turned me off staring at the glowing screen. Why such a bizarre message? Still, AI is notoriously bizarre. They call it artificial for a reason. You can't just create a mind that understands all the subtleties of human language and communication. This thought calmed me, and I went about my day, though the message was still in the back of my mind. When I returned home from work, I debated removing the app from my phone. However, after about 20 minutes reading Play Store ads and reviews, I decided it was an unnecessary effort to humor my paranoia. The thought of explaining my fears to another adult was honestly embarrassing, and that seemed like good evidence that the fears weren't warranted. The following morning, I awoke the instant my alarm began. Chewing on my thumbnail, I waited for the AI message to appear, almost certain it would be nothing. But I heard a crack as I separated the tip of my thumbnail from the rest, as my eyes soaked in the message. "It's too bad. You were good." A sweat broke out on my brow as I considered what this could mean. Paired with the message from the previous morning, it felt like an ominous goodbye, perhaps even a warning. But I had to consider the logical explanation that these were two random, unrelated messages created by an artificial intelligence program simply designed to string words together in a way that could make sense. I forced this thought into every crevice of my mind, convincing myself that it was an entirely explicable event. I still didn't mention it to anyone. Why should I? Just some silly software spook, best for a giggle at best or judgment at worst. The more I convinced myself I was overreacting, the less I felt like I should tell anyone what was going on. For months, again, the alarm functioned completely as normal, but this time I didn't forget about that unsettling message, and I took to, again, reading each daily quote with fervent dedication. After what was probably over 80 nonsense quotes on love, hope, and shoes, some quotes were less interpretable than others, I finally opened the app one crisp morning to another message. Frost traced thick white spirals on my window that formed abstract flowers against the dark sky. The sun would still be down for a while after I got to work. It was no longer possible to get ready in natural light. It would be an hour into my workday before the light even got bright enough to illuminate the sun catcher in the window. I reached out blindly for my cell phone, finding it by ear, and using the screen to find my lamp. As was my new morning ritual, I then dismissed the alarm and read the quote that appeared after. Even before it appeared on the screen, as if instinctively aware, my stomach dropped. "It won't be an accident." The odds that this was a randomly generated message, at least in my lizard brain, which wanted desperately to justify my growing obsession, felt significantly lower. Worse than following the creepy theme of the other messages, it seemed to suggest a morbid premonition. I had a thought to take a screenshot of the foreboding message, and then, as if defensively, the message timed out. For a long moment I remained in bed, body tensed, waiting for something. My eyes glanced around my surroundings with a paranoid suspicion, searching for threats in the shadows. When I finally convinced my frozen body to draw back the blanket, the rush of cold air seemed to snap me out of my trance. Quickly, I dressed in a warm sweater and jeans, barely remembering to brush my teeth and tame my hair before leaving the house. I receded into my mind for the rest of the day, giving one-word answers to typical conversation starters, and taking lunch in my car. I tried to approach the situation with a reasonable level of skepticism, despite my growing anxiety. I checked through my search history to look for searches referring to travel. Not planning a trip, this was obviously a dead end. Next, I looked for more subtle things, like anything referring to a cleanse from my social media. Maybe the AI was clever enough to see this and think I would stop using it soon. I had mentioned it briefly in an Instagram post a few months prior, but never followed through. This seemed like another dead end. Finally, I searched for anything related to accidents or injury. The breadth of this search showed a mention or two of muscle pain and a stubbed toe. Nothing recent or significant enough to justify the most recent message. I didn't seem to be influencing the AI in any way I could see through my own online behavior. So I decided to Google it. Maybe someone else had experienced or was still experiencing something similar. I wasn't even sure what to type into the search bar. My AI is sending weird messages. Not specific enough, and just led to a bunch of crap about AI conspiracies. Although I was beginning to think that might be the part of the internet I was looking for. Alarm app AI glitch. I waded through a few ads and unrelated articles before stumbling on a Reddit forum titled Evil Alarm. Within seconds of scrolling, I realized I wasn't the only one. Far from it. The forum was full of posts about my app, all complaining about similar, startling, and even downright frightening morning messages akin to the ones I was receiving. Several posts mirrored my own first message, "I'll miss you." The messages always seemed to change from there, notably never to the benefit of the poster. One post detailed a woman who used the app for years, only to wake up to, "You'll bleed so much." My face paled as I read her final comment on her own post, nearly 8 months old. "I'm more than freaked out at this point and deleted the app about a week ago. I don't think it matters. My old alarm just keeps going off, and the messages just keep getting worse. Yesterday I got, 'I don't think it will hurt too much,' and this morning it said, 'Are you ready?' I'm gonna get a new phone today. I don't think there's another choice. This must be some sick virus attached to the app." There were plenty of other users asking for updates since, and despite seeming to be very active in the community before, the user was now silent. I know that with any other help-seeking forum, this suggests that the person had their question answered and has moved on to other parts of the internet. But I had a very hard time convincing the rock in my stomach that this was the case. After my lunch break, I told my boss I was sick. After my quiet behavior and slightly extended lunch hour, he eyed me with suspicion from behind his desk. He pressed for a doctor's note, and I waved in flippant acknowledgement, already leaving his office with my eyes to my phone. After a hand-trembling, mind-racing drive home, I knew that I had to delete the app. Maybe I would buy a physical alarm like they had in the olden days, nice and vintage, with nothing intelligent about it but the design. Nothing that could ever conceivably find a way to communicate with me. Without hesitation, the app was gone, and I had found another, albeit significantly less consumer-friendly, app to replace it. Setting the alarm sound to the most obnoxious beeping I could find, I closed the app and fidgeted with my device. As an afterthought, I went into my library of music and removed the piano that had been my previous alarm music. The finality of the action felt legitimate, yet hollow. I expected a surge of relief, but all I was left with was a nagging curiosity. Would the app continue to function, the ghost of its programming buried deep in the software of my phone? Would I still wake tomorrow to a message implying my impending demise, or would this be the end? Filling the evening with mostly pacing and failed attempts to distract my thoughts, I fell asleep early. My dreams were plagued with the gliding of fingers on piano keys, a once relaxing sound made dizzying by association. I threw my phone into an ocean, ran it over with a truck, burned it in a fire the size of my apartment building, and still the alarm never stopped ringing. I swear I heard the noise the entire night, until it finally awoke me in the early hours of the morning. The noise of tinkling piano keys that should have been removed from my phone forever. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone and stared at the screen as I disabled the alarm that substituted the harsh beeping I'd selected from the new crap app the night before. As if I'd never done a thing, the alarm gave way to the AI message. "Make your arrangements." I swore and threw my phone across the room. It had to be a hack, a virus like they said on Reddit. Donning sweatpants and a sweater over my unwashed frame, I placed the phone gingerly in the outer pocket of my purse. I tried to ignore the buzzing in my chest, the roiling in my stomach that threatened to give way to nausea. The daily tool seemed a filthy vessel for something else now. I thought of all the sensitive information that may be at risk if this was a hacker, and latched onto that as a source of my queasiness. I made my way to the closest mobile store, realizing on the way that I hadn't even washed. Deciding I didn't care about anything, really, I pushed onward. I was willing to pay any sum of outstanding payments, or even switch providers, as long as I could get this soiled device out of my possession. When I arrived, already agitated and overly eager to be rid of my old phone, the store had just barely opened. A middle-aged man with a nearly full cup of coffee smiled at me as I approached the counter, arm already outstretched with an undamaged mobile. "I need a new phone," I said simply, rolling the sleeve of my hoodie between my thumb and index finger as I avoided eye contact. "Okay. Do you want to put a new phone on an existing contract or the whole deal?" He had a quizzical but friendly tone, and I looked at him briefly, eyes apologetic. "Whichever's faster. I just really need a new one." I was suddenly very aware of my unwashed hair, the smell of morning breath every time I spoke. In one of the polished glass panes behind the desk, I caught a ghost image of my appearance. I zipped up the front of the hoodie a couple inches and shrugged deeply into its folds. "Yeah, of course. We can probably switch you over." We did the very classic new phone conversation. I had to pay off the difference in price on this phone if I wanted a new one. I'd had the phone for a while, so before long and with only a measly $600 spent, more payments to come and an increase to my monthly plan, I was in the clear. As I walked home, dragging fingers through my knotted hair, I glanced at the new device. The salesman had said I could take the old device, but I happily refused. Since it was in perfect working order, other than possibly being corrupt by an evil application, though I omitted that, he'd given me $60 cash for it. Glancing at the unmarked screen, I made a mental note to buy a phone case for whatever new model I'd ended up buying. In my urgency, I hadn't thought much about protecting the new phone, as much as getting rid of the old one. I slipped the phone delicately into my purse in the inner pocket to avoid any contamination with the pocket touched by the previous device. I slept well that night. Better than I'd expected, as the anxiety had never fully subsided, even as I added my desired contacts and apps. No alarm. I would take my chances with my natural sleep schedule for now. But we both know I wouldn't be writing here if this was the end of the story, and you can probably guess what happens next. I awoke, at first, with the normalcy that exists only in dreams, to the sound of piano keys. The phone was in my hand before I opened my eyes to the hazy, dim light of the winter morning. The sky outside was glowing a soft, almost plush-looking shade of navy as the clouds enjoyed their extra hours without the sun. And the AI message followed, as always, after the alarm. 24 hours left. Ready? And that was it. I already checked my phone. The app isn't downloaded, and it's brand new, down to the SIM card. New number, not even connected to any of my social media yet. So, I guess I have 24 hours to ask, what the hell do I do next? Make sure you stay safe on the internet, and be careful about which apps you download. Not every threat out there is human. The crows sit on the edge of the field, their beady black eyes watching. They never approach the scarecrow hung in the center of the field. Maybe they know something we don't. Tonight's story is called My Neighbor's Scarecrow is Starting to Scare Me, written by Blair Daniels. Mommy? Mommy? For the third time this week, Ava's piercing cries came from down the hall. I leapt out of bed and stumbled to her room. Ava? Ava, are you okay? The scarecrow was looking in my window again, Mommy, she said through sobs. I sat down on my bed and wrapped my arms around her. Shh, it's okay, I said in my calm voice, rocking her back and forth. But inside, I was fuming. We live next to a small family farm. Years ago, when we moved in, it was just a farm stand by the road. Now it's grown into this kitschy weekend destination, complete with animals, a corn maze, and apple picking. Every Saturday, it's kids shrieking and screaming from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was, this year, they put this scarecrow in their corn maze, and it's honestly completely inappropriate. It's not some cute fall decoration with hay for hair and a triangle nose. No, this thing looks like it came out of an 80s slasher film. A tattered plaid shirt, ragged blue jeans, hay sticking out where its hands and feet should be. And the face was pure nightmare fuel. A piece of burlap with angry eyes cut into the cloth. A grinning mouth that had been stitched shut with thick twine. And my little Ava's window faced the damned thing. She'd been having nightmares for weeks now. Nightmares that this thing was looking in her window, standing in our backyard, rustling through the corn. First thing tomorrow, I'm going over to Betsy Smithson and giving her a piece of my mind, I thought, as Ava cried into my shoulder. This is not okay. I've put up with all the noise, put up with the fact that my backyard smells like a porta potty at a baseball game when the wind blows just right. Put up with the traffic jams in front of my own driveway on weekend mornings. This is too far. At 7 a.m. sharp, I marched over there, even though I was dead tired from the wake-up with Ava. I wound my way through the little farmyard paths until I got to the old farmhouse. Despite the crazy amounts of money the farm must have been bringing in, the farmhouse didn't look like it was in great shape. White paint peeled off the corners, and the thick glass windows were clouded with dust. I knocked 3 times, as loud as possible, and a moment later heard footsteps inside. "Oh, good morning, Emily." Betsy's sweet, smiling face poked out of the door. Despite the early hour, her blonde hair was perfectly combed and styled. "Betsy, listen." I forced my voice to be polite. "I need to ask you a favor." "Of course," she said, nodding, her blue eyes bright. "What can I do for you?" "My daughter, Ava, has been having terrible nightmares about the scarecrow you have hanging up in the corn maze. Do you think you could take it down, maybe?" Her expression darkened. "Emily," she said with a soft chuckle. "You know this farm's all I got. It's what pays our bills, puts food on the table. After Pete," she trailed off and coughed. "Let's just say we'd be in poverty if not for the farm. Having 6 kids isn't cheap." I frowned. "Yes, I know. That's why I haven't complained about the noise, the traffic, or the smell. But this scarecrow, surely it's not some vital part of the farm. Couldn't you just take it down, at least for a little while?" Her blue eyes bored into mine. "I'm sorry, I can't do that." Before I could respond, the door clicked shut. I stood there on the porch, stunned. While Betsy's been a pain sometimes, I didn't really expect her to say no to such a modest request. Surely the scarecrow isn't some huge critical part of the farm. They just put it up this year for Pete's sake. Pete. My anger melted a little. She has been through a lot. I lingered on the porch for a few seconds more, and then went home. When Ava got home from school, it was like the nightmare had never happened. She was her usual bouncy self, pulling out her paints and working on her homework. But around bedtime, my anxiety increased. "Ava, how would you like to sleep in Mommy's room tonight? And Mommy will sleep in your room?" She stared at me. "That's weird," she said finally. "Come on, it'll be fun." I was eventually able to persuade her, without any mention of the scarecrow. She was out by 8, and I got settled in her unicorn bed, reading on my phone for a while. Around 10, I turned out the lights and went to sleep. Something woke me at 3 a.m. I rolled over in the tiny bed, trying to fall back asleep. I could see why Ava was afraid. It was a pretty grotesque sight out her window. The scarecrow was scary enough in broad daylight, accompanied by the excited shrieks of children. But now, in the quiet of the night, under the full moon, it was absolutely horrifying. Silver moonlight outlined the body, stuffed to the brim with straw. The arms hung limply at its sides. The head leaned forward slightly, resting on its chest. The hollow eyes glared out into the darkness. The grin remained stitched with twine. All around it, the corn stalks swayed in the strong wind as if bowing down to their master. I shuddered. After 10 minutes, I still couldn't fall asleep. I finally got up and walked down the hallway. I checked on Ava. She was sound asleep. I went downstairs, ate a piece of cheese, flicked on the TV for a few minutes. Then I went back upstairs and settled into bed. I yawned, pulled the covers over myself, and froze. The scarecrow had moved. Before, it had been facing the road. Now it was facing my window. Fear pounded through me. My heart thumped wildly in my chest. "Stop, there's nothing wrong. It's really windy out, see? See how the corn is moving like that?" A gust of wind must have hit the scarecrow, turned it a little. I took a deep breath, then another. That's all that happened. I probably would have stayed up for hours if not for the fact that I was so tired from Ava's nightmare last night. My eyelids grew heavy, and despite the fear in the tiny bed, I fell asleep. That morning, I forgot all about the scarecrow. I happily made Ava waffles before school, sprinkling mini chocolate chips into the batter. I packed her backpack and sent her off on the bus. Then I sat at the kitchen table, finishing my coffee before I had to leave for work. Wait. What is that? Something long and golden in the grass. I opened the door and walked out into the backyard. The scarecrow stared down at me in the bright sunlight, the corn rustling in the wind. I slowly crouched down to inspect what lay in the grass. My heart dropped. It was a piece of straw. If you've ever walked off the trail on a hiking expedition, you know how scary and difficult it can be to find your way back. But what if, no matter which way you went, you could never leave? This story is called "This Afternoon I Went to the Park with My Son. Now We Can't Leave." Written by Blair Daniels. I went to the park this afternoon. I thought it was going to be a fun experience. I really did. But going out with an independent 3-year-old is never a fun experience. "Go off the path," he said. We went off the path, into the wet grass and mud. The mile-long trail surrounds a wide open field that extends forever. It's beautiful to look at, not so fun to actually walk in. "Come on, let's get back on the path," I said, gesturing. Of course, He turned the other direction and ran further into the field. "Hey, come back here, now!" I sprinted after him. My feet sank into the mud with a gross squelch. I could feel the water seeping into my boots, cold and damp. I finally caught up with him, panting. I grabbed him by the shoulder. "We have to go back on the path, okay?" "No!" I sighed and looked around. We were farther out than I thought. Green grass extended in every direction, gently sloping into hills and curves. A few trees spotted the landscape. The sky above was gray. Rain drizzled down, blurring the trail that looped around us. Well, shit. This was going to be a long, muddy, messy walk. "Come on," I said, pulling him by the arm. We walked for a few minutes. Then he abruptly stopped, bent over, and started taking off his left shoe. No. You have to keep those on." I bent down, grabbed the shoe, shook it out for rocks, and jammed it back on his foot. Sighing, I stood up. Huh? The trail looked farther away. No, it must be my imagination. I took his hand, and we trudged forward. He made it difficult. He kept turning around, looking back over his shoulder at something. I kept my focus, as we mothers are so good at doing. When everything's going to shit, we just stare straight ahead, plowing forward. I kept my eyes locked on the blurry red dot of our car that looked so far away. "What's that?" he finally asked me. "We're going to the car," I replied sternly, as if I could magically transport us there with my words. "Is that a person?" He twisted his whole body around, looking at something behind us. I kept my hand locked fast in his, trudging forward. My ears were freezing, my feet were wet. I could not lose focus. "We're going to the car," I repeated, through gritted teeth. "Is that a person? In the tree?" "Come on, we're going to the car." "What's he doing?" "We're going to the—" His little hand fell away from mine, a soft thud on the grass. "Oh, buddy, I'm sorry." He'd slipped in the grass and was sitting now, staring behind us. Perhaps I'd been too mean, pulling him forward like that. He was so preoccupied with whatever he was looking at that he wasn't looking where he was going. I gently pulled him back up. "I'm sorry, I just think we need to get to the car, now. It's cold, we forgot your hat, so your ears are going to hurt, and—" I looked up. My breath caught in my throat. There was a figure, hanging by a rope on the tree behind us, limply swaying in the wind. What the hell? Every muscle in my body froze. For a second, I was paralyzed, just staring. The figure hung limply, dark in the shadows of the branches, unmoving. It can't be real. Yeah, of course. How would a dead body just be hanging there, in daylight, for the world to see? There'd been a few joggers on the trail. Clearly, they would have seen it and called the cops. And in the drizzling rain at this distance, I couldn't see any details. It was most likely some stupid prank, or a belated Halloween decoration. "What's the person doing?" My son continued staring at the figure. Don't worry, it's just some stupid joke." I took his shoulders and turned him around, grabbed his hand, marched forward without looking back. The wind whipped towards us, spraying rain in our faces. I squinted, fighting through, my toes ice cold and numb. I forced my eyes on the parking lot, focused on that little red dot in the distance. But the dot grew no closer. We walked for 5 minutes, then 10, then 20. Every step we took, the path was still so far away. Finally, we stopped. I glanced around in every direction. We were still in the middle of the field. The tree was far behind us. I could barely make out the figure hanging from its branches, but the path was still as far as it ever was. How is that even possible? I glanced around hopelessly, trying to figure out which part of the path was the closest, which direction to go in. But it seemed like we were in the dead center of the field. "I want to go home," my son said, wrapping his arms around me. Fear panged in my chest. I knelt to his level and hugged him. "I know, I want to go home too. We just need to walk a little longer." We continued walking. When he got too tired, I carried him in my arms. We walked for a half hour, then an hour. The trail stayed out of reach. I finally collapsed into the wet grass, giving up all hope. Then I saw the jogger. He was in the distance, plodding along the path slowly, wearing a bright red windbreaker. I watched his path along the gravel trail. Then I screamed, "Help! Please help us!" He was far, but definitely not far enough away to hear someone screaming at the top of their lungs. Yet he didn't turn around, just kept jogging along the path that never seemed to get any closer. "Help!" I screamed. "We can't get out! Please, come help us!" He just kept going. It's getting dark now. We've been trapped here in the middle of the park for almost 6 hours. I'm scared and hungry. So is my son. We're huddled under a little cluster of trees trying to stay warm. I've tried calling every emergency line from my phone, but I only get static. I'm not even sure this post will go through. But I hope something happens soon, because I hear noises, horrible sounds. The wind coasts through the park, but in its wake I hear whispers and snarls among the rustling of the trees, as if the park is coming alive. And that jogger? I'm not so sure he's just some random person, because he's still here, running the loop around us for hours, never slowing down, never stopping for a break. And he's much closer than he was hours ago. I think he's gone off the path. I can't see him in the darkness, but I can hear him. Hear his ragged breaths. Hear his footsteps on the wet grass. Getting closer with every step. How would you react if you suspected your significant other of being unfaithful, and then you found another person's hair in the shower drain? This next story is called "I Think My Husband Is Cheating on Me," written by Blair Daniels. I knew it when I found the hair. While changing the bedsheets, I found a long black hair, curled up right next to my husband's pillow. There's no way it could be mine. I'm blonde. "Any idea who this is from?" I demanded, shoving the hair in his face. "What is that, a hair?" "I found it in our bed." He looked from me to the hair, then back again. "Are you saying you think I'm cheating on you?" "Of course that's what I'm saying," I wanted to shout. "There's another woman's hair in our bed." But I swallowed, stepped back, and took a deep breath instead. "Do you know whose hair this is?" "No idea. Maybe from Tanya when she visited?" I mean, to be fair, Greg's never given me any reason to think he's cheating. He's a computer nerd who spends most of his time on Reddit or playing D&D. He's attractive, but not an Adonis by any standard. I haven't noticed any missing time, and he doesn't seem overly protective of his phone. But the clues kept piling up. For one, I started finding the hairs everywhere. One on the kitchen counter, another in my home office, a few on our couch. When I emptied our Roomba, there were a dozen or more, all tangled up with the dust. One night I smelled perfume. Greg claimed he couldn't smell it. How could he not? It was really unique, sweet and floral, yet with a tangy undertone, almost sour. Smelling it made my stomach turn. Another night I went into the bathroom and saw something small and red on the tile, like a shard of plastic maybe that had broken off something. I bent down and picked it up, only to find that it looked like a fingernail, yellowish white on one side, red lacquer on the other. But it was so small, I really couldn't be sure. Little incidents like this kept happening every few weeks. A hair, a whiff of perfume. Every time I almost had a panic attack. Sometimes I'd confront Greg in a wild rage. Other times, I'd just innocently ask him what it was. It depended on my mood, how desperate I was feeling. He continued denying it, and I really truly started to believe him. I told myself that it was all in my head. I was being paranoid. My marriage was fine. But then I found the smoking gun. On Saturday, I was supposed to go out to dinner with a friend. But as soon as I got to the restaurant, I got a text from her saying she had to cancel. Disappointed, when I got home, I went straight up to the bathroom and started a nice hot shower going. I peeled off my clothes, waited for clouds of steam to pour out, and then threw back the shower curtain. There was something in the drain. I bent over to inspect it, and my blood ran cold. It was a clump of black hair. "How do you explain this?" I yelled, running out of the bathroom naked. I dropped the wet clump of hair on his chest. He stared at me, at a loss for words. What? "Her hair was in the shower." "Whose hair?" he asked, picking the clump off his shirt and grimacing. "Don't you fucking gaslight me. Your girlfriend's hair." "Haley?" He looked into my eyes, and he really did seem honest in that moment. "I really don't know whose hair this is, but I'm not cheating on you." "How stupid do you think I am?" I growled, like a rabid animal. "There is another woman's hair in our shower." "Okay, you need to calm down." He threw the hair on the nightstand, stood up, and gently wrapped his hands around my shoulders. "I understand why you would think I'm cheating, but I'm not. I promise. She's in the closet, isn't she?" "What?" I looked down at the trail of water on the carpet, leading straight from the bathroom to the closet. "That's just from me. I just took a shower and went to the closet to get my clothes." I sidestepped him. "Haley," he said in a warning voice behind me, but I didn't listen. I ran across the room, grabbed the doors, and slid them back. It was empty. I pushed our shirts back, kicked the piles of laundry on the floor, even went on my tiptoes and checked the high shelf. Nothing. I told you I wasn't having an affair. "This doesn't prove anything," I wanted to yell. "So she's not here. It still doesn't explain the hair, the perfume, or any of the other fuckery going on in our house." But I forced myself to shut up, because no matter what I said, if he were having an affair, he wouldn't tell me. I'd have to find out on my own. The next day, I left for my mom's. I left before he woke up. With everything going on, I just couldn't face him. I needed space, time alone. I sent him a text after I got there, telling him I'd be home in 3 days. but I just missed him too much, so I came back after 2. I drove home in silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. I pulled into the driveway near midnight. The house was dark, except for the dim nightlight we always left on in the bathroom. I quietly slid the key into the lock and opened the door. The house looked just like it did when I left. Dirty dishes piled up by the sink, and a clump of laundry sat in the corner. I walked over to the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible. And then I heard it. Light, thumping footsteps, coming from right above me. My heart dropped. I ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. No, no, no. I raced down the hallway, our door looming at the end. It can't be. It can't. I burst into the bedroom. The adrenaline rushed out of me as I realized it was empty. Well, Greg was there, in bed, asleep, or pretending to be. But the room was dark and silent, and everything looked as it should. Did I imagine the footsteps? No, there was no way. I scanned the room slowly, looking for anything out of place. My eyes caught on the closet. No. Sticking out from the slats was a lock of black hair. My blood ran cold. I took a step forward, my heart hammering in my chest. Greg, I know you're not asleep, I said softly, not taking my eyes off the door. He didn't stir. You're playing some sick kind of game, Greg, you know that? I whispered, my eyes locked on the black hair. Come out, now, I said, my voice shaking. Or you'll be sorry. A faint thumping sound in reply. I ran over to the closet doors, my hands locked on the handles. I sucked in a breath. Haley? Greg was slowly sitting up in bed, rubbing his eyes. What are you doing back so early? I turned to him. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. Eyes red and swollen, deep circles underneath. I let go of the doors and backed away. He reached for me, but I kept going until my feet hit the cold tile of the bathroom. I grabbed the door and shut it in his face, clicked the lock. The bathroom was dark, only lit by the nightlight. My panicked breaths echoed against the walls. I wrapped my arms around myself and began to sob. There's no way that could be my husband's mistress, because she was dead. The night I found the hair in the drain, I snapped. I stole Greg's phone and eventually found the secret stash of texts. A quick Google search found her address. I went over there at 4 a.m., raging with fury, and ended the only threat to my marriage. Then I went to my mom's house because I couldn't face him. Came back after 2 days because I missed him. But I never should have come back. A soft sound jolted me from my thoughts. A wet squelch. My head snapped to the bathtub. There was a dark shape behind the shower curtain, shifting slowly as more wet smacks echoed against the walls. I reached for the light switch. Bright light flooded the small room. I squinted, wiping the tears from my eyes, and then glanced at the bathtub. Nothing there. But when I pulled back the curtain, there was a clump of black hair in the drain. You know, they say most murders are committed by someone the victim knows. Really makes you wonder if one of your friends or family members is just waiting for the right chance. Our next story is called Last Night I Played the Game Among Us. Something Went Horribly Wrong. Written by Blair Daniels. Last night, I played Among Us with a bunch of college friends. It's a computer game similar to Mafia. You and the other players are on a spaceship, and everyone is either a crewmate or imposter. The crewmates try to complete tasks they're given, and the imposters try to kill everyone. There are some nuances, but that's the gist of it. It was 5 of us. Me, my roommate Braden, the girls double across the hall, and David in a single above us. We were all in our respective bedrooms alone in a video call, because if we were actually together, we'd see each other's screens and spoil who was the imposter. Besides, it was the responsible thing to do with the spike in cases recently. Should I start the game? On the screen, 5 little bipeds ran across the room, their faces obscured by cartoon glass. I scanned the name floating over each person. Braden, Allie, Jenny, David. Go ahead. The screen flashed. Crewmate. There is one imposter among us. Then the game was off. I made my little character run over to fix some wires. About 30 seconds in, I heard Allie's voice. No! I just got killed! Hey, no talking about the game. I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. Then mute yourself. Aw, come on, give her a break. I frowned. Through the speakers, I could hear the faint echo of my voice as Braden's microphone picked it up. These dorm walls were so thin. It's her first time playing, Braden. Come on. If everyone says when they die, it gives everything away and ruins the fun. Okay, I won't say anything. Words flashed across the screen. Dead body reported. Then someone called an emergency meeting, and we shrunk our games to see the video call. Allie crossed her arms. I'm so mad. I can't believe... Don't tell us who it is, David said, his face pixelated and a Led Zeppelin poster behind him. I heard a few thumps above me as he shuffled his feet. Listen, I saw Jenny just walk into a room and then walk out. That's telltale imposter behavior. Get lost. I say we vote Jenny off then, I said. She glared at me through the screen. I think it was you. It wasn't me. I was fixing wires. We voted. Jenny got voted off. She was the imposter. Then we started another round. I was, again, a crewmate. One imposter was among us. I was doing the card scanner task when I heard Allie's voice again, coming through the speaker. No. Get away from me. You're not supposed to talk about the game. Come on, you're ruining it for everyone. No, get away from me. Come on, Allie. Now we know you're not the imposter. Stop it! Then she finally stopped talking. The line went silent. Okay, has anyone found her body yet? Nope, not yet. I finally finished my card scanning task, so I walked my character around the spaceship, looking for the engine room. I got lost down a few hallways, but finally found it. I froze. Allie's character, a bright pink astronaut, was just standing there. Not dead, just standing still in the center of the room, as if she were away from the keyboard. Guys? I found Allie. She isn't dead. Then what was she going on about? Is anyone dead yet? We can't call a meeting unless we find the body first. An unsettling feeling filled me. I walked around her in circles. She didn't move. Allie? You still there? Silence. Jenny, is she AFK? Shouldn't be. I'll go check, though. Shuffling sounds filled the speakers as Jenny got up and left her computer. The rest of us, Braden, David, and I waited in silence. Then sound burst through the speakers, a scream distorted by static. "Allie? Oh my God, Allie, can you hear me?" Her voice cracked with fear, a sob, and then their soft echoes from Jenny's microphone in the next room. "Jenny, what happened?" "Call the police!" I reached for my phone, but as I did, words flashed across the screen. "Dead body reported." And above it, the image of Allie's pink character, dead. I dialed the police with shaking fingers. "What's happening? This is sick. Really fucking sick." I listened to the ring, then the 911 operator came on. "Someone was attacked in my friend's dorm, West Hall." I stopped. All this time, there'd been that soft echo of my voice, Braden's computer picking me up through the thin wall. Now, it was gone. I stood up, shaking. My hand closed around the cold doorknob. I pulled it up just an inch and stared out into the common room. The door was creaking open. Behind it, Braden, holding a knife in one hand and his laptop in the other. I scrambled back into my room, thrust the window open, and began to climb out, but not before my eyes caught on my own screen. Dead body reported, with the image of my character. If you enjoyed these stories, follow the links below and leave them an upvote. You can also find some of the author's books on the author's Amazon page linked below in the description. Don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to us for more horror stories. After all those, I don't think it's safe to go outside, look out your window, or go to the bathroom. I think the best, safest course would be to stay inside in the dark, alone. But remember, don't fall asleep. My cat came home covered in blood yesterday, and it's led to a terrifying discovery. Written by Notice Obscurity. I know what you're thinking. The cat probably killed a bird or scratched himself up, and initially I had thought the same. But then things got weird. And look, I'm not even into spooky stuff. I'm a project manager at a tech company, and my girlfriend, Sam, is the most logic-minded person I know. She's a science teacher. And listen, we don't live in a weird place that gives off Netflix murder mystery vibes either. Quite the opposite, in fact. Sam and I live in a small English town off the motorway, the kind of idyllic place with hamlets and cobblestones and an old church that was built some 500 years ago. Everything about it is fashioned like it could be pulled out of one of those town and country type of magazines. A place full of old men who still doff their cap at women when walking their dogs, and where it's so safe you see young kids walk to school over the cobblestone streets every morning. Sometimes it feels like we've walked into the 1950s. And true to form, the internet can be a little dodgy, but the beauty and warmth of the little place makes up for any small inconveniences. Our little blue cottage is on the far end of town, up the hill that leads out, and we always considered ourselves lucky to find it. Even if the kitchen was too small, at least we got a decent-sized back garden. Our landlady was a kind woman who lived 2 towns away. She was one of the few landlords that allowed cats on her property, and we moved in with our little black cat Byron on a cold February day when the grass in our front lawn was frosted and the ivy growing along the walls was utterly bare. That was 2 years ago, and honestly, we've had no complaints. We've had an IT guy in a couple of times to help us with the internet, but by and large, everything's worked the way it should, and we've been happy here. At least we were, until that night. In the English countryside, A lot of us let our cats roam free, and our cat was a feral rescue. Given the lack of cars around us and the motorway being far enough away not to be a worry, we'd let Byron out to roam in the back garden in the woods. He'd scamper off during the day, black tail swishing, and come back for dinner in the evening when we called him. The woods began behind our house and stretched all the way to the lavender fields, and sometimes Sam and I would take walks through the path that began behind our house. Our neighbors were charming. The town was charming. Our life felt charmed, too. Would have stayed that way forever if Byron hadn't come home one day, black fur slicked with what looked like liquid from head to toe, eyes wild, meowing a deep, hideous mewl that I'd never, ever heard from him. Sam and I were sitting in the garden after 8, and it had been a hot summer day due to the heat wave. Sam was wearing a pale pink summer dress, and I was in shorts. We just finished eating our dinner when Byron appeared on the fence, his green eyes wild. He came tearing over to Sam and jumped on her lap. She laughed initially. Byron had always been a big baby and very attached to her. But then she wrinkled her nose. A strange metallic smell wafted into the air. The kind of smell you get when you walk past an alleyway behind a butchery. Except this was so strong, it made me sick. Sam looked green too as she lifted Byron and sniffed him gingerly, then winced and put him on the ground. "What is it, babe?" I asked, although I had a horrible feeling I knew what it was. Byron was extremely agitated, and he wouldn't stop mewling. Sam turned to me to speak, and I sat back, my eyes wide. "What the fuck?" My girlfriend's pale pink dress was covered in crimson stains. Her hands were slick with deep, unmistakable red that could only be blood. She followed my gaze down to her dress and gasped, "Oh, God!" At the time, I didn't think much of it, but right behind Sam, I thought I saw a tall, dark shadow move through the woods, a soft crunching of leaves under shoes. It was only a second, though, and I was quickly distracted by Byron again, who was laying on his side on the ground, still mewling. Without another word, Sam picked Byron up, who was still crying, and we rushed inside the house. She put him in the cat carrier, and I raced outside to start the car as she washed her hands. When she came out, she'd changed, and the cat carrier was in her arms. We didn't even speak as we drove out to the vet in a panic. If Byron was injured, he needed to be seen now. I'd never seen so much blood come from such a small thing before in my life. Byron mewled and mewled inside the cat carrier, and Sam was as white as a sheet. We had lost a cat before, and Sam had taken it so badly that she hadn't got out of bed for 2 days straight. I leaned over and touched her arm to reassure her. "Don't worry. He's a tough little shit. He'll be fine." I glanced over at her with a slight smile, but she didn't smile back. Luckily, the vet was only a 5-minute drive from the house, and country vets tend to be a little more available than city ones, so we were able to get Byron through reception quite quickly. Sam looked like she was going to burst into tears in the waiting room. Byron wouldn't stop mewling, and I felt completely helpless. What had happened to Byron? Had a fox attacked him? He didn't seem physically hurt, just covered in blood. Where was he bleeding from? "Byron." Dr. Martin poked his head out of the examination room. He gave us a smile, and his eyes twinkled beneath his glasses. Byron's mewling grew a bit softer at the sound of Martin's voice. He loved Martin, who always had treats for him at the end of every examination. Martin, tall, balding, and still smiling, opened the door to let us all in. "So, What happens to be the problem?" I cleared my throat as Sam put Byron down on the stainless steel table. "We were hoping you could tell us. He's crying and he's covered in blood, but he won't let us check him to see where it's coming from." Martin pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and headed to the cat carrier. He opened it, and Byron cautiously stepped out. Something really wasn't right here. He was acting so unlike his usual friendly self. Martin ran a gloved hand down his fur and then lifted his fingers to the light. "Well, it's definitely blood." Carefully, he checked Byron's mouth, nose, his fur, and even examined his rear. He looked up. "Nothing. Not even a scratch." Something felt a bit odd about the way he said this. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't seem, as concerned as I would imagine a vet would be. But I felt Sam nearly pass out from relief next to me. "He's okay then?" Martin nodded, a large smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, he's definitely not injured. Something's just shaking him up. He might have killed a bird in the woods." "That's a lot of blood for one little bird." The involuntary thought popped into my head. I noticed he took a swab and wiped some of the now drying blood on it. Then he buzzed for the nurse. "Can you wash young Byron with the medicated shampoo, please? He's made a right mess of himself." Before the red-headed nurse took Byron to the next room, Martin gave him a treat. He must have noticed my expression as I looked at the swab, and he smiled reassuringly. "I'm going to run some tests on the blood just to be safe. We'll let the nurse clean him to see if there's anything we missed, but you should be able to take him home today." Sam breathed another sigh of relief. "Thank you so much, Martin. Do you know when you'll have the results?" Martin chuckled. "Us in the backwaters here? About a week or so, I think. It'll have to go to London to get tested." He saw Sam's ashen face and quickly added, "I promise you'll be the first person I call when the results are in." "Thanks," I said, ushering Sam out and giving Martin a smile. Sam sat in the yard, still a bit pale but clearly doing better. In about 40 minutes, Jenny, the nurse, brought Byron out to us. "He's been lovely as always, a bit tired now, so he should sleep right through the night." I kneeled and looked at Byron in the carrier, and a pair of bright emerald eyes glinted back at me. He meowed softly and padded at the cage door, asking for cuddles. "In a minute, mate. Let's get you home." I paid the bill, which was a whopping £100, as Sam took the cat carrier back to the car. As we drove out, I saw Jenny and Martin standing at the front of the clinic, watching us. We waved at them, but they didn't wave back. Instead, they just stared at us as we drove away like we were strangers they'd never met. Byron slept between us that night. He was usually a more independent cat. It's like he knew something was going to go wrong. Sam sleepily stroked his belly, and I watched her hand repeat this movement until I slowly fell asleep. The next day, everything felt different. I don't know what exactly it was. It's like the flavor and taste of the whole house had changed. You know when you wake up the day after losing someone you love, and everything feels like it's just gray? It was that feeling, but neither Sam nor I had lost anything. In fact, Byron was fine. He woke up and was as playful as always. Still, Sam and I didn't even speak to each other as we usually do when we first get up. We spend a few minutes cuddling and talking before one of us makes coffee. Today, I tried to speak to her before I got up, but she was facing away from me. She just got up, fed the cat, and got dressed like a robot. Her skin was still pale, and I reached out to squeeze her hand after I came out of the shower, and she didn't squeeze it back. It was like she was a ghost, and the real Sam wasn't even there. I tried to put it down to the fright she'd had the previous day. We left for work barely even saying goodbye properly to each other, when usually we hug each other so tight, knowing it's the last time we'd see each other for 8 hours. As soon as my car hit the motorway, I felt a wave of relief pass through me. When I parked in the car park to my office and picked up a coffee and sausage roll from the cafe around the corner, I practically had a spring in my step. What was happening? Why was I so relieved to be away from my cozy little home life with Sam? I usually counted the minutes to getting home, but today my gray desk and my gray little cubicle with the ugly fluorescent lighting looked like the most inviting thing I'd ever seen. I sat down to start doing back-end stuff for clients, and the hours ticked by fast, too fast. I worked through lunch without realizing it. Before I knew it, it was 4 p.m., usually the time I would start perking up, but instead, a hard knot had formed in my stomach. I started feeling queasy. Something felt wrong. I texted Sam "Hey, are you home yet?" She got off work earlier than me. I didn't get a response back, and I tried to ignore the rising panic in the back of my throat. Sam always got back to me quickly around now because we would plan dinner over text in my last hour at the office. She would usually already be cooking by the time I got home, and then I would take over and let her put her feet up. It was our routine. Today just felt off. The clock hit 5, and with my heart beating fast, I walked to my car. Putting the key in the ignition felt like signing my own death warrant. What is wrong with you? Nothing's happened, and you're acting like the world's going to end, I told myself, annoyed as I backed out of the car park. I paused and put on a ridiculously happy playlist to buoy my mood, but the feeling of dread was well and truly settled in my gut now. The whole way home, I kept glancing at my phone, hoping to hear from Sam. Nothing. I turned off the motorway towards my house, and something kept calling me back, as though this would be the end of something, as if this drive that I did 5 days a week was leading me to my death, and I was just ambling along, transfixed towards it. Sam's car was in the driveway. I looked at it, then back at my phone, and frowned. The ping of a text came through. I grabbed it to read it. It was from Sam, but it was so odd. Now it is in the woods. That's it. Nothing else. I texted her back. I'm home. Are you in the garden? Should we get takeaway? There was nothing back for some time. Then I saw the 3 gray dots of her typing come up. My phone pinged again. Now it is in the garden. Again, this was starting to freak me out. It almost felt like someone had stolen Sam's phone and was texting from it. My heart, already beating fast, was starting to race. Hands slightly trembling, I texted her back. Sam? Are you okay? Again, those 3 dots. Then they stopped. Truly panicked now, my heart drumming so hard it felt like it was pounding in my head. I opened the car door and used my key on our front door, letting myself in. The house was dark. Every single curtain was drawn. I called quietly into the abyss. Sam? And then I heard it. The sound of feet running across the back wall of my house, as if someone was running along it at full speed and making their way around the corner of the house to run across the wall to my side. And I locked the front door behind me just as I heard the feet pause on the door. Then I heard a heavy, unmistakable foot stomp on the wood. I backed into my darkened living room, my chest tight with fear. The thudding continued. My phone pinged again. I looked down. It was another message from Sam. Now it is inside the house. As soon as I got that message, the thudding stopped. I frantically looked at my phone screen, the only light in the room, and I called Sam. Straight to voicemail. Desperate, I backed further into the house, blindly trying to find the back door to the garden as I texted her. "Sam, where are you?" Another 3 dots formed, and my breathing nearly stopped. I tried calling her again, still straight to voicemail. I scrambled for the doorknob on the wall, using my phone as light. Just as I'd found it and began to turn the knob, that dreaded ping sound resounded across the dark room. Slowly, I turned the face of my phone to look at it. My hand trembled on the doorknob, wanting to turn it as I read, "Now it is in front of you." I froze and slowly shone the light in front of me. At first, there was nothing, but then the sound of several joints cracking filled my ears from above. Slowly, sweat dripping from my brow and my whole body telling me not to, I looked up to see a pair of filthy, bloody feet with every single one of the toenails ripped out. I didn't wait to look further up. I opened the door to the back garden and ran, leaping over the fence into the woods. The sound of joints cracking, the loud footsteps chased me, as though whatever was making that sound was at my heels. I ran faster and faster, knowing that if I kept going, eventually I would get past the trees and into the lavender fields just beyond. And maybe I could run to the farmer's house. And maybe... But something was wrong. The woods were wrong. The trees felt bigger. The path seemed to twist and turn to another path, and then another, and then another. And all along the thing kept up with me. It wouldn't stop. The woods seemed to have lost their end point. If I could take a moment to use the map on my phone, I would be able to get out of here. But I couldn't stop because the thing could get me, and... Suddenly, I stopped. The sound of joints clicking and running behind me also stopped. There, in the middle of the path, was a door. A large crimson door where nothing should be. There was nothing else, no house attached to it, just a door. Then I heard it, Sam's voice, just beyond the door. "Nick! Nick, help me!" "Sam, hang on, baby, I'm coming!" I screamed, racing toward the sound. But as I ran around the door to reach the sound of her voice, it was suddenly coming from behind me. I turned, puzzled. I hadn't even noticed the thing that was tailing me was gone. I ran backwards past the door again, thinking I'd misheard Sam's voice. "Nick, I'm here!" The voice was behind me again. I wanted to cry in frustration. I was scared and panicked, and I was so sure something had happened to Sam. Her voice sounded so far away, but she was in pain. I knew she was. "Sam, where are you?" My brain thudded against my skull, and I sank to the floor holding my head. No, I couldn't give up. I had to find Sam. I had to. I heard a quiet, unmistakable meow right next to me. I looked down to see Byron rubbing his little head against my side. I reached down, trembling, to touch his head, half afraid he was an illusion. He purred and rubbed his head against my hand. I choked back a sob. He was real, and I was so relieved to see him. I picked him up and buried him against my chest, taking in his soft warmth. Tears began to fall down my cheeks as I rocked him. "Where's your mom, Byron? What's happened to your mom?" Byron just meowed, not understanding what was going on, but made no move to leave me. I buried my face in his fur to hide my tears, and then suddenly Byron hissed and wriggled against me. I looked up, letting him go, and he ran into the woods. I wanted to stop him, but there, right ahead of me, was Sam. She was facing away from me, facing a tree trunk, but it was her. I knew her long red hair anywhere, and I stumbled to my feet, yelling, "Sam!" But as I ran towards her, I slowed. She was wearing the same dress from yesterday, but it was more dark red than pink. Blood caked her legs and arms, and her feet. Her feet were facing me. Sam was facing the tree, and her feet were facing me. Contorted feet, feet with nails ripped out, bloody feet. I stumbled back as the horrible realization swept through me with violence. I wanted to throw up. "Oh, Nick." Sam's teasing voice bounced off the tree trunk. "Nick, Nick, Nick." Her voice became more guttural as her pronunciation of my name became more and more nonsensical until it was a demonic cracking of joints. And then Sam twisted her entire neck towards me. That's when I saw it. Her face. I stifled a horrifying cry when I saw her face. There were bloody sockets where her eyes should be. Her mouth was wide in a smile, but every single one of her teeth was missing. It was like someone had taken a knife and carved everything away, leaving nothing but a bloody mess. Her tongue jutted around madly, her mouth mangled as she gargled from her blood-filled lips. "And now it is in the woods, and now it is in the garden, and now it is in the house, and now it is in front of you, and now it is in the woods, and now it is in the garden, and now it is in the house, and now it is in front of you." She was saying it so fast, the words weren't making sense, and she was reaching for me, her mangled, twisted, open wound of a mouth repeating the words over and over, and I stumbled back from her, my eyes wide, until my back hit the crimson door, and Sam's hands were on my shirt as she grabbed me and pulled me close. I could almost taste the drying blood on her face. The decay of her had already begun. My hands, finally realizing they could do something, tried to push her rigid, wrong body away from me, but she was obscenely strong, and she gripped me hard and kissed me with that wound where her lips should be. Nausea hit me so hard it made my knees weak. I threw up then, struggling against her. As I did this, she pushed me hard, and I fell through the open door and kept falling and falling and falling through the darkness. I hit water. At least I thought it was water. There was a strange, strong smell I couldn't place. In the darkness, I couldn't tell what it was, and my eyes took some time to adjust. I moved my hands in front of me blindly and touched something smooth and cold. It felt like... My fingers dipped, and I realized I was touching the eye sockets of a skull. I gasped and fell back into the water. By now, my eyes had adjusted a bit, and I saw that I was sitting amongst several decaying corpses, mountains of them, and I was sitting in blood. I wanted to run out screaming, but shock paralyzed me to the spot. Whatever had done that to them would soon come back for me, and I think I would have stayed there, white-faced with shock, if I hadn't heard a soft meow from behind the mountain of bodies before me. It was Byron. He rubbed his head against my wet shirt, and I realized that this is where he must have got blood all over him from. I touched his head gently and saw he was already moving away. It occurred to me he must know a way out. I followed him carefully. My vision in this dark cave-like place was in and out. Luckily, he was meowing and I could hear him. I can't tell you how relieved I was to see the light. I almost cried. Byron came up to me and I hugged him, both of us soaked in blood. It was the forest and it was getting darker, but at least I wasn't in a cave full of corpses. I nearly ran, seeking the edge of the forest adamantly, Byron struggling in my arms. Finally, I found an edge by the side of the road and collapsed there, still holding my cat tight. I didn't even notice the elderly couple stop their car and jump out to ask if I was all right. I didn't even feel them guiding me to their car. I'm now sitting here in the accident and emergency room. They had to pry Byron out of my arms, and the nurse is watching him because I screamed bloody murder when they took him away from me. All I can think of is Sam. Her face, her eyes, those woods, and the pile of corpses in that cave. I know it wasn't her who did that. It couldn't be. But they've tried calling Sam many times now. She's nowhere to be found. They say they keep getting her voicemail. Her work says she hasn't been in for a week, which makes no sense at all because it was only today that she was acting any different. The hospital has called the police. I can see from the dark clothes that a cop is walking towards me. His face is heavy with suspicion, and I'm starting to realize just what Sam's disappearance and my turning up looking like this looks like. But just the thought of it is utterly absurd. I didn't do a thing to Sam. Sam nearly killed me. Didn't she? I found a creepy photo album that belongs to my wife, but she denies ever seeing it. Written by Notice Obscurity. My wife Isabel and I met because of a murder in our freshman year at college. Her dorm had been blocked by the cops because a girl we both knew had been found stabbed 42 times in her bed. The killer had taken her eyes, mouth, nose with him. The strangest thing was that not one person in that crowded dorm heard her scream. Isabel lived a few rooms down from the scene, and I saw her standing at the very center of the crowd, her arms wrapped around Christy, the victim's roommate, who was white with shock. They looked terrified and still in their pajamas, but Isabel turned and her blue eyes met mine. Something in her gaze was so sad and scared that I knew right then in that moment I needed to protect her. I went up to ask if I could help in any way, and ended up spending the day helping Isabel look after Christy. After that, we were pretty much inseparable. I was there for her when the police announced they were trying to search for the killer but had no leads. He struck again a few towns over, exact same MO, and then again a town over from there. The press began to call him the college butcher. Isabel spent more time at my room after that. She was majoring in literature, so I'd find notes strewn across the room about everything from Dante's Inferno to Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I didn't mind, though. Isabel was beautiful, kind and funny, and someone who lived a very normal life until that point, so I could understand the shock. She loved her parents, had 2 younger sisters, and the first time I met her parents for Christmas, I almost resented my own parents for not welcoming me nearly as warmly as they welcomed us into their home. It was perfect. Too perfect. And I should have been smarter, wiser. But I was young, stupid, and deeply in love. We got married a few years after college, after I'd got a job as a software developer, and she'd got a job working as a teacher at the local high school. We bought a house in a quiet, safe neighborhood, in a quiet, safe town, and for a while, everything seemed so good. For 10 whole years, everything has been good. Until 3 weeks ago, when I decided to clear out the attic, because I could swear I heard something skittering up there when I was getting ready to leave in the morning. Thinking it was mice or rats, I told Isabel in the kitchen that night while she was adding the finishing touches to the bolognese, and I was pouring us a couple of glasses of wine. "I think there's something in our attic," I said casually as I passed her the glass of wine. "I'm going to go give it a clear out, see if it's a rat or something." When she said nothing, I looked at her face. It was completely pale, and she was staring at me with something I could not place in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was something else. "Don't go up there. I'll deal with it." I frowned. "I really think it's something small, and I've been wanting to clean up that place for a while. Let me deal with it." She stared at me then, and a sort of involuntary shudder went up my spine. "Jack, do not go up there. Promise me." I nodded slowly, confused. We respected and loved each other, and I wouldn't want to hurt her in any way, and given how stressed she was, I knew I had to listen to her. But she may as well have dangled a chocolate chip cookie in front of my face and told me not to ever touch it. So I waited until she left for work one morning and went up there. The attic was dark, but we had a light in the middle of the room. Regardless, I had my phone's light I could rely on. Since ours was an older house, we had actual stairs leading up to the attic, as opposed to a ladder, and when I walked to the end of the hallway and opened the door that led to the attic, I swore I heard a creak at the top of the stairs. The kind of creak only a foot can make when it lands on a faulty floorboard. The hair at the back of my neck stood up, as though a cold draft had blown into the hall. I squinted into the darkness at the top of the stairs and softly asked, "Hello?" As the moments passed, rationality caught up with me. How stupid was I to think there was something up there? Annoyed at myself, I climbed, grasped my phone and flicked the light, and with more confidence than I truly possessed, I walked up the stairs, listening to each stair creak as I did. The attic was creepier than I remembered it. It was actually a space I'd planned to convert into a game room of sorts, but Isabel had talked me out of it, and honestly, over the years, I'd forgotten how big it was. It was your average attic in many ways. Dusty, wooden floors, a small window at the end of the room overlooking the neighborhood, but it was spacious. Sure, it held all our junk, but even so, the boxes and the couple of pieces of old furniture took up such little space at the far end of the room. I remember thinking how nice skylights would be in the sloping ceiling. Why had Isabel, who was so organized and wanted all the rooms in the house to be used, so keen to leave this as it was? A slight unease had started to make its way around the corners of my mind. As if on autopilot, I walked to the end of the attic where the 5 boxes which contained Isabel's things were lying. Part of me was screaming that this was a massive invasion of her privacy, but I didn't care by that point. I wanted to see what was in there that was making my wife act so strange about this particular room. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and pulled the first box to me, opening it up. The first box was just some old clothes that she'd kept for sentimental value. T-shirts signed by friends, a few old sweatshirts, nothing that really piqued my curiosity. The next book was just some old books which she didn't want to part with, but for some reason wouldn't keep in the bookcase I'd built her in the living room. When I reached the third box, something in me hesitated. I think a part of me knew that my life was going to change after I opened this box. Some strange sixth sense. Carefully, I unsealed the box and looked inside, and a sigh of relief overcame me. It was just framed photographs in a photo album. I smiled and lifted the first one, Isabel and her sisters laughing as children at her 4th birthday. Some were of her parents and others of us. Then something struck me. Why hadn't she put these photos up downstairs? That weird chill was back. The box only held the large brown leather photo album now, and my heart racing, I opened it to its first page. It was a large black and white photo of a small girl on a swing, facing away from the camera. That, in itself, was creepy. But the creepiest thing about the photo was another little girl in a white dress who was standing at the edge of the woods looking at the girl on the swing. It was almost as if she was looking at me through the photo. The next page had the same little girl on the swing, playing on the jungle gym, smiling as she swung from the bars. Behind her, the strange little girl stood, watching her every move, her eyes cold, her mouth a thin line. Page after page of this little girl living her life, and the strange girl standing on the edges, watching her. As the girl grew up, I recognized her to be Isabel. And the girl watching her looked like her. A darker, angrier version of her. I swallowed hard, watching my wife's doppelganger grow closer, seeing photos of her in my room with the shadow of herself watching her. My vision swam and I felt sick. Snapping the album shut, I wedged it under my arm and fled the attic, taking the stairs 2 steps at a time down. As I closed the door and leaned my head against it, I took a slow, shuddering breath. What the fuck was going on? That evening, I waited for my wife to come home at the kitchen table, nursing my strongest whiskey in my hand as she walked in through the kitchen door. "Hi, hun," she greeted me with a kiss, and dumping the shopping bags full of groceries on the table. "How was your day?" I paused and slowly cleared my throat. "I found it, Isabel." She was pulling milk out and was about to turn to the fridge to put it in when I said this. She frowned, putting the milk down on the table. "What do you mean?" I quietly lifted the album off my lap and put it on the table. "This is why you didn't want me to go into the attic, right?" The words came out harsher than I intended them to. She looked at the album, and her face turned pale as though she'd seen a ghost. But when she looked at me, she said, "I've never seen that before in my life," and without another word, walked out of the room. I chased after her. "Isabel, who is the girl in this? Look at me when I'm talking to you!" I grasped her arm and turned her towards me. She slapped me hard across my face. My wife, who wouldn't even raise her voice at our cat when he scratched her, slapped me. I watched in open-mouthed shock as she stormed up the stairs into our bedroom and slammed the door. The album was still in my hand, the weight of it an omen. And that's when I heard it again. The skittering I'd been hearing from the attic. Except now it sounded like it was coming from our bedroom. "What the fuck?" I muttered. that's when the scraping started. It sounded like someone was very slowly clawing at the floorboards above me. My heart began to race as I slowly looked at the darkness at the top of the stairs. Why hadn't she switched the lights on when she went up there? "Isabel?" I called, my voice hoarse with fear. At first, there was nothing, but then I heard it. "Isabel," a high-pitched voice mocked from the darkness. My blood ran cold. I was terrified, but the thought that my wife could be in danger was more overpowering. I ran up the stairs to our bedroom door. I found it wide open, with no trace of my wife inside. "Hey, Isabel?" I asked hesitantly as I looked around the empty bedroom. That's when I felt it. A cold hand grabbed my ankle from under the bed. I screamed and pulled myself out of its grasp, stumbling backwards until I fell against Isabel. She grabbed my hand and dragged me down the stairs. "I told you not to go into the attic," she sobbed as she dragged me to the front door. "Now you've let her out. You've let her into our lives." As we got outside, she rushed to the car. "Hurry up, before she finds us!" I jumped into the passenger seat without saying a word. "Isabel, what the hell is going on?" She started the car, and we zipped out of the driveway. I could see her knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so hard. She finally spoke, her eyes focused on the road. "She's always been there, always angry. You see, I'm the one who got to live." "What?" I was more confused than ever. "I'm a twin, Jack," she said to me quietly. "I'm the twin that survived while she died in the womb." I looked at her, confused. "So she's what?" "She's an evil spirit who wants a chance to live, and ever since I was born, she's been eating away at my life. That album was a way to trap her. Those photos were like talismans I used to keep her in there. Every single physical piece of evidence she exists. When we were in college and that awful thing happened, I went to a professional. She helped me trap her, and then I opened up the album and let her out," I said softly. She nodded, a resigned sigh escaping her lips. "She wants to be me, you understand? She won't stop until she's absorbed all of me." I was quiet. That's when I saw the movement in the mirror. Turning around, I saw the thing that wanted to be my wife sitting there, grinning at me. I yelled. Isabel slammed on the brakes. We didn't even see that truck coming. We didn't have a chance. When I woke up at the hospital later, a policeman was standing next to me, looking grim. I blearily tried to get up, but my whole body felt like a bruise, and I fell back onto the bed, breathing hard. "Isabel," I whispered. Every part of my body hurt. Where was my wife? "Mr. Taylor," the policeman said. "I'm sorry to inform you that your wife was killed in the accident." The news hit me like a punch in the face. "No." I strangled back a sob. "No, no, no, no." "Sir, I am sorry for your loss, but you're going to need to answer some questions for us." The police officer pulled up a file and looked at me carefully. I nodded through the tears running down my face. "We'd like to know why your DNA has showed up in a string of murder cases. Are you familiar with the case of the college butcher?" If there's anything I've learned tonight, it's that some doors ought to remain closed, and some books should stay shut and tucked away. What if you could see the violent thoughts and cruel intentions of the people around you? You could see violence and malice born in real time. But just because you can see them doesn't mean you can stop them. This story comes to us from Trash Tia, and it's called I've Been Able to See Bad Intention on People Since I Was a Kid. I still couldn't save my classmates from my teacher and town. Bad intention can take several forms. Depending on what it is, it can either be smoke curling around someone, like a storm cloud brewing, or something more nefarious. Smoke is simple. I see slight wisps of it around a person or hanging around in the air. That's basic bad intention, like cheating on a test or considering being rude to someone. I'm okay with smoke. I can usually ignore it. Sure, it kinda has a scent which makes me feel nauseous, but it's tolerable. That kind of intention is normal. I'm pretty sure if I looked in a mirror, it would be around me too when I'm in a bad mood. On the other side of the spectrum is the kind I can't deal with. It's intention which haunts a person and will not let them go, will not get out of their mind until they've satisfied that disgusting, vile thought. It is poisoned emotion and feelings compiled into one bleeding black monster, wrapping itself around its victim's neck. Pain, joy, lust, anger. It was all of them, a vicious cocktail of human emotion, creating something horrific. It can be triggered by something, trauma, for example, but no matter what, it's always there, waiting. Faint, but still noticeable. I used to think they actually were monsters, that they were responsible for the bad things people did. But then I came to realize it wasn't a monster. What I saw was part of the person. It had been part of them since they were born. A sour, slithering shadow bleeding from them. It's impossible to cut away, to detach, like a shadow, and it follows people everywhere, whispering into unsuspecting minds. Whether or not the person acts on it, the color will either darken or fade. Most of the time it gets darker, but I've seen it fade. I'll use simple bad intention as an example. When I was 5 years old, I was shopping with my mother, and she didn't have enough cash for groceries. She smiled at the cashier and did the walk of shame back to the milk aisle, pulled the whole milk carton out of her cart, and paused before putting it back on the shelf. I'd seen the smoke before we even went into the store. When she was strapping me into the back seat, I'd noticed a gray plume dancing around her. I wasn't scared of it. If anything, I thought it was pretty, giggling to myself. "Mommy, what's that?" I pointed to the smoke, enveloping my fingers in it. It reacted to my touch, black tendrils dancing around me. Mom twisted around, searching for something which wasn't visible to her. She looked right past it. "What is it, sweetie? There's nothing there." The smoke had gotten darker as we got closer to the store, and when Mom was frowning at the carton, halfway to putting it back on the shelf, she took a moment to glance at her bag. I saw the exact moment the thought entered her mind, and the smoke around my mom tightened itself around her. It wasn't fun to look at anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to look away. When I did, Mom was sighing, putting the carton back on the shelf and grabbing my hand. On the way out of the store, the smoke faded until it was nothing but tiny sizzles of electricity sparking out. See, that is intention that starts off bad, but strong minds can fight it. My mom wanted to steal the milk, but she forced her way through that thought and put it back. I've seen really bad intention, too. I want to tell you everything in as much detail as possible. but writing about this is hard. Still, though, I need to give you some background, right? Or what I'm going to tell you is going to sound insane. I've only ever seen really bad intention a few times in my life, so I've kept away from it. I've glimpsed it in passing. An old man frowning at a stray cat, a little girl glaring at her mother standing in front of traffic. But I don't look further. I just keep walking and pretend not to see it. There was a point where I couldn't avoid it. I didn't know my kindergarten teacher had bad intentions. She was called Mrs. Jess. She had pretty hair which smelled like apples when she picked me up, and she told jokes we all laughed at. Being so young, I knew seeing smoke was a bad thing. But what about something which was even more terrifying? Something which stopped me in my stride and elicited a shriek clawing in my throat. I didn't mean to catch her. It was my mom's fault. After class, she made me go back into class to grab my macaroni statue I made. I knocked it over and messed it all up, but Mom insisted on seeing my creation. So, being a stubborn 6-year-old, I'd stomped back up my kindergarten steps and pushed open the doors with way more force than necessary. Stepping into my kindergarten classroom, I automatically felt a sense of dread building in my gut. The lights weren't on, and the smiley face paintings we'd all made looked eerie in the dim glow of the setting sun through wide windows. Ignoring my squirming gut, I ran over to my seat where my macaroni statue still half stood, in all of its clumsy glory, slightly tipping to the side. Gathering it into my arms, I made a quick escape, eager to get back to my mom. Before I could make it to the door, a sharp cry rang out, and I stumbled to a stop, almost tripping over my shoes. Mom was on the other side of the door, I thought. She was going to hug me and tell me everything was going to be okay. But somehow I found myself moving backwards, my gaze searching the air for smoke. It was always there when something bad was about to happen, or had already happened. I saw it immediately, hanging in the air like black slime. There was a trail, spatters on the floor, bleeding black, leading me further down the hallway, until I found the source at the very end. Mrs. Jess. She was standing with a bright smile on her face, and she was wearing her favorite dress. She still had the plaits in her hair, the ones I'd tried to do at lunchtime. I was already smiling, the knot in my gut starting to unravel. I opened my mouth to greet her, but the words choked in the back of my throat when I saw it. It was huge, a slithering snake of pitch darkness wrapped around her throat, dripping onto her white dress and tainting her legs. Its tendrils gagged her smiling mouth and pulled it into a foul grimace, which sent me stumbling backwards. It was everywhere. The monster swarmed her, enveloping my teacher's face. It wasn't just blanketing Mrs. Jess, but the hallway, puddles of slime I had to fight not to accidentally step in. The teacher's smile broke through the sour-smelling beast crawling around her. I had to cover my mouth and nose. The stink was putrid. It was sour milk and rotten food creeping into the back of my nose and twisting my gut. "Cassandra?" She said my name in question, like always. Her voice was no different, sweet and flowery, what I'd trusted, and yet I could see who she really was. I could see what she was hiding. Behind her, the door was open. In the distance, her car engine rumbling. "Cassandra, are you okay?" I didn't move. I couldn't. Cringing away from the pooling black puddle on the floor, creeping towards me. I didn't understand why Mrs. Jess was a bad person until the door she was standing next to opened. The boys' bathroom. A smaller figure appeared hand in hand with a stranger. I couldn't even see the man through the darkness choking him. He was nothing but a twitching darkness with a tight hold around Wendy Lily's hand. From the frightened look in my classmate's eyes, I knew the stranger wasn't her father. I started to scream. Maybe it was because of the darkness growing around me, consuming everything, including Wendy, or because my kindergarten teacher had grabbed my arm with far too much force, her facade crumbling. Luckily, I got my mom's attention and she called the cops before Mrs. Jess and the stranger could drag Wendy away. I later found out, years later, over breakfast where my mom read it in the newspaper, that my teacher had lost her own daughter several weeks before and had intended to steal Wendy away for herself. Mrs. Jess had served 5 years in prison before dropping that bombshell, before taking her own life. The monster I saw that day was the first time I saw the kind of intention which can poison your mind until you can't think straight, until you have to satisfy and feed that craving. I'm not here to talk about the incident in kindergarten. I want to talk about something which happened recently. What I'm still coming to terms with. I grew up mostly ignoring bad intentions, either because they're only light or I really didn't want to get involved. The kind of bad intention which you have no way of stopping. A kid pushing her mother into incoming traffic, an old man taking a cat home and suffocating it with his recently deceased wife's favorite scarf. How am I supposed to stop things like that? I can't see what they're going to do, only if the want is strong or weak. There was a time when I tried to stop bad things happening. It was never a monster, just smoke a little darker, or what looked like a storm cloud. When I was 14, I followed a teenage boy home when I saw the dark cloud above his head. I was convinced he was going to kill someone or cause serious hurt. The boy had stopped halfway down the street and pulled out his phone, glaring at the screen. He'd pressed the phone to his ear and cleared his throat loudly. "Hey, Mom?" His voice was choked up. "Yeah, hi. Dad's fucking Aunt Mara." His lips pulled into a grin. "Okay, bye." Since then, I've been hesitant to try and stop people acting out on bad intention. If it was just smoke, it really could have been anything. I was thinking about the consequences of that boy calling his mom and spilling that kind of invasive information halfway through Mr. Asher's detailed explanation on artificial intelligence. It was English class, but someone had asked if AI was ever going to take over the world, and that had plunged the class into a discussion which went from aliens to artificial intelligence, and then, somehow, to fighter jets and airplanes. Mr. Asher was an avid enjoyer of aircraft of any kind, I'd noticed. He had posters on the walls of anything from a 21st century airplane to a weird robot thing which looked straight from a sci-fi movie. "What is the most important part of an aircraft?" His voice snapped me out of my thoughts, and I lifted my head from where I'd been meticulously doodling Adventure Time characters in the back of my notebook. I'd been battling a headache for most of the day. After hoping it would disappear on its own, I swallowed a Tylenol with half a bottle of flat Coke, and it was yet to have an effect. I figured staring at my desk would help, but a dull pain was already crawling across the back of my skull. "Anyone?" Mr. Asher urged the class with a sigh. "Come on, guys, this is preschool stuff." Fourth period English was usually the time I tuned out of class. It's not like we learned anything. Mr. Asher just ranted about future mechanical weapons and AI replacing the U.S. Army. Riveting stuff. Most of my class were either half asleep or buried in their own work. Still, though, some kids were listening, mainly the girls. The teacher was easy on the eyes, let's say. 40 or 50-something years old, with an actual jawline and Hollywood smile. He looked good for his age. Of course, the girls were listening to his rant. I jumped when Mr. Asher clapped his hands, snapping the class out of it. Come on, wake up! Most important part of an aircraft! Do you mean like a plane? Milla Jason raised her hand awkwardly. The wings? Yes, Milla, Mr. Asher said. Wings! I'm glad someone's listening. But what else? Come on, I'm talking about the power of the ship. The craft would have no chance of moving without it. When there was no response, Mr. Asher clicked his fingers in front of a girl's face. I was half listening, shading my Jake in. I'd drawn his face weird. He looked more like a deformed Squidward. Wake up, Marina! What have I told you about sleeping in class? Join in the discussion. Let's get some energy. Why aren't we doing English? Kai Oliver spoke over kids yelling out ridiculous answers. This is English, and we're supposed to be studying the Crucible. So why have we spent the last hour and a half talking about your weird obsession with planes? He was right. I mean, Mr. Asher really did make his obsession obvious. He inserted that particular subject into every discussion. Kai's words sent a shockwave through the class. Some kids laughed. Others muttered that he was rude. I expected the teacher to start shouting at him. There was a pause, a moment of silence when I could hear my individual breaths as I struggled to mend my Princess Bubblegum's hair. That is very true. Mr. Asher cleared his throat. And we will, Kai. But first of all, why don't you answer my question first? I'm not sure why, but the teacher's words had weight to them, a second meaning. His tone was different, and I couldn't figure out on what it was. So, the teacher's footsteps startled me, the click-clack of his shoes making his way over to the back of the class where Kai was sitting. I was a few seats away from the kid. As Mr. Asher got closer, my pencil slipped from my fingers. I thought it was a fluke. I thought maybe a sandwich had gone bad in my bag or some idiot had brought in sour milk. But no, the smell was suddenly there, real, a putrid aroma suddenly choking the air, creeping into my nostrils and burning my throat. I had to slam my hand over my mouth to stop myself puking. I felt my body stiffen up, my breath growing thinner and thinner as the teacher's footsteps stopped in front of my classmate's desk. I heard the creak of Kai's desk when Mr. Asher leaned on it. Why don't you tell me, I didn't dare look up. Just for a moment I wanted to be blissfully unaware. But when my gaze went to my lap, my eyes were already wandering. I saw his shoes first, expensive leather slip-ons. As my gaze traveled up, I saw it. I saw writhing darkness blurring my teacher from reality completely, wiping out his face. His body was the only thing left, along with half of his head swallowed in the monstrous tendril snaking around his throat and shoulders, slithering tendrils already restraining his wrists. The air was thick with foul stink, already traveling around the classroom. It didn't touch other students, focusing on my teacher. I could just about glimpse a patch of Mr. Asher's face peeking from the abomination blanketing him. I could see what nobody else could, and what had been highlighted by that thing. His smile, which was far too big for his face, almost cartoonish, a nightmarish grin growing and growing and growing on his face. The thing was pulling at his lips, fashioning them into a horror spectacle. Mr. Oliver, the amalgamation of writhing shadows said. What is the most important part of an aircraft? I could feel myself moving back in my chair, my body physically reacting to what I was seeing. My throat burned, a cry clawing to get out, hysteria tangled on my tongue. The pilot, obviously, Kai said, his voice slicing through my hurricane thoughts. For a moment, I was confused why he wasn't jumping up and freaking out, pointing at the nightmare which was our teacher. And then reality settled in. Kai couldn't see the bad intention. He couldn't see what the teacher was thinking, what was emitting from him. A sickening urge which was driving him crazy. It was a craving, a lust, to do the unthinkable, and I had no idea what the unthinkable was. It could have been anything. Murder, or worse. It had to be that bad. The monster wouldn't be there if it wasn't something that would cause injury or death, whether that was mental or physical. Mrs. Jess's bad intention was to kidnap my classmate and make the little girl her own daughter, and the monster had been bad. This was worse. This thing was sending my lunch into my throat, turning my gut. When I risked a look up, it was everywhere. A sentient tendril of darkness worming its way around the classroom, burying itself into the walls like mold. I found my gaze latched onto the two of them, student and teacher, as they seemed locked into a staring match. Kai with a slight smirk, and Mr. Asher with intrigue. Kai was the smartest in the class. Usually he kept quiet and to himself. But his intelligence couldn't be hidden in skyrocketing test scores worthy of an Ivy League school. That's right. Mr. Asher backed away, his arms folded across his chest. The darkness followed him, growing thicker and thicker the more he was thinking, the more his thoughts were growing more twisted in his mind, and that craving was getting worse. Tell me, Kai, would you ever pilot a craft? As my teacher's bad intention was getting worse and far more realistic, a tangible thing he was starting to plan in his head, the smell went from sour milk to rancid burning and something dead, something rotten. I could see every fucking emotion on the patches of face still showing through writhing black. He was planning. And that plan that he was putting together in his head was exhilarating him. So much so that the teacher began to tremble with excitement. Look away. The words struck me. Look away. But I couldn't. I couldn't look away because I wanted to know. I wanted to know what was going on in his mind. What was so vile that his bad intention was enveloping him, transforming him into a beast from my childhood nightmares. Kai raised a brow. Me? He leaned on his fist, clearly contemplating. Nah, he laughed. I'd probably crash it. Nonsense! Mr. Asher spoke with such vigor and excitement. To any other person, he was just excited. Why do you think that? He leaned forward, anticipation igniting in his expression. I'd never seen him so excited. It was sickening. I've read about people who've openly said they want to know what goes on inside a psychopath's brain and leads them to commit the atrocities they do. Trust me, though, you don't. You won't see logic or explanation to why they did it, because it doesn't exist. This isn't sickness. It's not something which should be studied. It's a craving which can't be explained. A tumor which grows and grows and grows until it's all-consuming. And I see all of it. I see it from the start to finish. I saw it in my English teacher, Mr. Asher, who'd managed to hide it so well until something triggered it, bringing out his demons and showing me everything he was thinking. Everything except what he was planning to do to Kai Oliver. "You're the first person this year to be recommended to an Ivy League, Mr. Oliver, and you're worried you wouldn't be able to pilot a craft?" Kai shrugged. "Well, it depends which craft," he said, before picking up his battered copy of the Crucible and waving it in the teacher's face. "Can we actually study now? Not that I don't love talking about planes, but we need to do actual work." For a moment, I thought the teacher was going to argue before he nodded and stepped away. "Quite right," he said, before resuming the discussion he'd started right at the beginning of the class. I watched him walk back to the front of his class and slump back into his desk. He picked up the Crucible and started to read. But his planning wasn't ending. His thoughts were so loud, perpetuated in the stink in the air and shadows swallowing him up until he was nothing but a blur of black. I buried my head in my knees and forced myself to breathe. I had to stop it. Whatever it was, whatever he was planning, I had to stop it. It's not like I could go to the police and tell them I was seeing bad intention on my teacher. I'd be sent to the psych ward. So I followed Kai Oliver around. It sounds stalkerish, but I was determined to make sure he wasn't a victim of bad intention. Kai Oliver was boring, I'll just say that. After class, he went to the library for a study period. I sat opposite him and pretended to read from the Crucible. He spoke to me twice. The first time was to let me know that I was reading my book upside down, and the second was a while later. He lifted his gaze from his copy, a small smile curving on his lips. "You're following me." "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." Kai closed his book. "You followed me from Mr. Asher's class, and now you're doing a bad job of pretending to read a book." He cocked his head. "What is it? Do you want me to tutor you or something? That's what the other kids want." "Other kids?" He nodded. "I was stalked by a group of girls a few weeks ago. I thought they were interested, but they just wanted test answers." Kai rolled his eyes. "I got used to it eventually, but I don't tutor." His eyes darkened. "You want to know the secret to getting good grades? It's called working. Your social life doesn't matter. Just lock yourself in your room and study hard." I leaned back in my chair, attempting to look casual. Kai and I weren't friends. We'd never spoken in our collective 17 years of life, and yet I felt like I had to get close to him to save him from a horrific fate. Why would I need a tutor? If I kept him talking, I could keep an eye on him without it being weird. Judging from his expression, though, I'd already made it weird. The boy looked amused, not annoyed. That was something. At least he wasn't telling me to fuck off. "You got the lowest grades last semester," he said. When I opened my mouth to ask how, he shrugged. "I peek at the teacher's notes sometimes." Kai stabbed a page in his book. "You're on thin ice, Cassie. They're about to call your parents." "Oh, that's..." I drew out a breath. "That's pretty bad." "Yeah, it's pretty bad." He shot me a smirk before jumping to his feet. "Like I said, just study. If you really want those grades, work for them." Kai sent me a sarcastic salute. "There. Happy now? Now you don't need to follow me everywhere." Panic flooded me when he started to move towards the door, and I was automatically on his heel, trying to keep a good distance. When he pushed through the library doors, I followed, shouldering my backpack. "Where are you going?" "Home." Kai didn't turn around, quickening his stride. I work better at home, and no offense, but you're kind of freaking me out. You got crazy eyes, Cassie. Kai mind bugging his eyes out, laughing to himself. What? Do you see dead people? Something like that. Looking around the corridor, I didn't see any smoke or shadows. Mr. Asher was nowhere to be found, and neither was his bad intention dripping from every crevice in the ceiling. Kai took the stairs 2 at a time, and I made an effort to keep his distance. Kai reached into his jacket and pulled out his earphones, corking them in. Still no Mr. Asher. Class was still in session, but I expected the teacher to make his move quickly. I had to make sure Kai got home safely. My brain was in overdrive as I ran after him. Eventually, it became too obvious. I was catching up to him, and the boy kept twisting around and shooting me warning glares, like he was seconds from calling the police. Kai crossed a main road quickly, ducking into an alleyway, and I aimed to follow him. I remember stepping forwards onto the road with full intention to run across it and after him. But at the corner of my eye, smoke was forming in the air, billowing, dancing, twirling under the late afternoon sun. It was coming from a truck driver, and it only took one look across the road at a woman pushing a stroller holding hands with a smiling little boy for me to know his bad intention. It wasn't quite inevitable yet. Still gray, but it was there. It was at the back of his mind, already eating away at his thoughts. I found myself transfixed by the smoke, and I forgot to move. Forgot to remember to get out of the road. I don't remember the car hitting me. It felt more like the world was imploding around me, and I was the center of it. My head hit solid concrete. That I know. Next thing I knew, I was in the hospital, surrounded by my parents and several nurses wearing wary smiles. According to them, I had mostly head trauma and a sprained ankle. I felt like shit, but I was already panicking about Kai. After downing half a glass of water, I asked my parents how long I'd been asleep, only for them to tell me it had been 5 days. 5 fucking days since I'd been asleep. It was an induced coma, apparently, to make sure there was no internal bleeding. I tried to get out of bed, but my body was aching, my head swimming. Kai Oliver, I managed to hiss out when Mom insisted I got rest. Is he okay? Did anything bad happen to him? Mom got a funny look on her face. She looked like she might reply before deciding against it. What is it? I whispered. She stood up. Nothing for you to worry about. Get some rest, okay? I'll be back tomorrow. When she left my room, I only had to turn my phone on to understand her paling cheeks. 3 students from my school had gone missing, including Kai. Smart students, I realized, after looking through the names. Lily Hartley, Kane Jacobs, and Kai Oliver. I remembered seeing their names gilded in gold in the school's main reception. My mind whirred with questions. What would Mr. Asher want with smart students? I felt guilty for not seeing his bad intention with Lily and Kane. After reading through a local article posted 2 days earlier, I felt sick. It hadn't been a week since their disappearance, and the police were already ruling it as kids skipping town. All of them were 18, but that didn't matter. It didn't make sense that there was barely a police investigation. When I felt well enough to stand without tipping over, I discharged myself from the hospital. Mr. Asher's house was easy to find, with some Googling and a conversation with the school receptionist. He lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. His house was what you might expect a middle-aged man to own, a large Victorian build with modern touches to it, a skylight built into the roof, and a gate with a mechanical lock I found myself standing in front of. Before I could press the button, I smelled it again. Sour milk. The air around me blurred, and I glimpsed a shadow at the corner of my eye. I wouldn't go in there, kid. The shadow had a gruff voice. It sounded like an oldish man. When I turned to look, there was nothing there but the slightest outline indicating a human figure bleeding into late afternoon light. The figure smelled of bad intention, but his voice was strangely gentle. Every soul in that house is dead. I didn't move, didn't speak, though he must have known I wanted to know more. I was a detective in the late 90s, he murmured. Bunch of kids disappeared, 16 or 17-year-olds. I knew it was the teacher as soon as I was put on the case. His laugh was gravelly. That man was a fucking weirdo, but the kids loved him. Anyway, I tried to set up an investigation into him and was laughed at by the other guys, so I thought, fuck it, I'll do it myself. The man's breath was startlingly cold, prickling my neck. Worst thing I ever did, 'cause the next thing I know, I'm being strung up and gutted like a fucking pig. He didn't say much to me, only that he was going to watch me bleed out slowly, so I'd feel everything. And I did. I felt him tugging out my insides like the bastard was enjoying it. Well, he most likely was. His words sent shivers down my spine, and I took a subconscious step back. I still don't know what's in that house to this day, the man sighed. I can't get in. I didn't write the being dead rule book, so I have no idea why I can't enter my place of murder. I just remember the shit he told me while he was watching me spill my guts. He calls it his metal kingdom, or something like that. Whatever the fuck that means. He snorted. The man's a lunatic. I pray for those kids' souls. The ones he took in the 90s and now. Whatever he does to them, I bet it's a fate worse than death. I caught what looked like a finger blurring into view. He pointed to a window on the top floor. I see him sometimes at night. It's usually when they visited their parents. They're good company, but most of the time I can't bring myself to meet eyes with them, you know? I couldn't save them. Fuck. The three of them were right below me and I couldn't save them. He killed me before I could, and even then I didn't even make it to where they were. I was 2 steps into the kitchen before a lamp was slamming down on my head. And there I was, strung up in his piggy barn, ready for the slaughter. I didn't realize I was speaking until I heard my own words. He's taken more of them? Yeah, older this time, around 5 days ago. He paused. I'm guessing these are friends of yours? I didn't answer. And, he cleared his throat. You're gonna completely ignore everything I'm telling you and get yourself killed, too. Again, I didn't answer. I pushed the button and steeled myself. It's your funeral, the man grumbled. Just tell me what's in there, all right? I've been waiting almost 30 years. I just want one question answered. Why kids? Not just kids, I thought. Smart kids. Not to mention another question driving me crazy. Why was the town protecting him? The man, or at least the outline of him, faded, as well as the stink of sour milk. I was back in reality, standing in front of my psycho teacher's house, after his victim just told me had murdered 3 teenagers in the 90s and had kidnapped 3 of my classmates, who were no doubt going to have the same fate. I wanted to turn and run, but before I could, the gate swung open. The speaker crackled, my teacher's voice coming through. Cassandra Samuels. Even his voice was tainted with the stink of rotten mold. "What brings you here? This is quite the surprise. I was actually just about to attend a dinner date." I managed to find my voice. "I need help," I said, panicking. "With the crucible. I don't understand it." "That is what the online whiteboard is for, Miss Samuels. Find all resources in the latest folder I uploaded." "I don't have internet at my house," I lied. "My power's gone off, and my parents are at work." He paused. "I can spare some time to go over some of the points we went over in class. Why don't you come inside?" Mr. Asher greeted me in the doorway. His bad intention was gone, which meant he'd either fought against it or given in. I already knew which one it was. The teacher led me inside his house. It was cozy with a lounge I peeked inside, and a kitchen which looked far too sterile. His laptop was set up on the dining room table, and he offered me a seat before pulling out his teacher's notes and a copy of The Crucible. We'd gotten maybe 20 minutes into a lecture I wasn't even fully taking in when the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I had to get out of there and find out where he was keeping the other students. I figured using the bathroom excuse would work, though, to my surprise, he shook his head, shooting me a sly smile. No bathroom, I'm afraid. Both of them are currently out of use." Tapping my pen on my notepad, I was struggling to swallow my mediocre lunch. "That's okay," I said, and jumped to my feet. "I should probably get going anyway." My mind was already working ahead of me. I counted my steps, and then his following mine. Mr. Asher led me out into the hallway, and I passed an expensive-looking table laid with paperweights. I wondered if he'd used one of them to knock out Kai and the others, as well as the detective. Before I could hesitate, my hand was whipping out and snatching up a glass paperweight shaped like a heart. The teacher had his back to me. It was the perfect hit. I bet I was shadowed with bad intention at that moment, but if it was to defend myself and find my kidnapped friends, did it really matter if my soul was blackened too? I didn't think. I just swung the damned thing. Mr. Asher had twisted around to talk to me, and I'd taken the chance and slammed the paperweight as hard as I could into the back of his skull. I expected it to be a knockout, like in the movies, but I was unaware real life was far different. My teacher didn't collapse to the ground, but he did stumble, howling in pain. He was caught off guard, so I struck him again, which this time sent him tumbling to the floor. He was still breathing, somehow. I took that as an opportunity to explore the mammoth interior of his house. I made sure to shut and lock the door in case someone came in, and I dragged my teacher's unconscious body in the downstairs bathroom, locking that too. You might think this was all meticulously planned, but I was just panicking. I checked the upstairs first. All of the bedrooms were empty. I knew they would be. I guess I was stalling. I really didn't want to check the basement. Though when I was sure every room had been searched through, the only place left was down narrow concrete steps. The basement wasn't what I was expecting it to be. I thought I'd find some kind of torture chamber, or at least my friends tied up. That's what I thought my teacher was. I thought he was a psychotic kidnapper who reveled in pain. What I found, however, was a room which looked like it was made of metal. The walls were concrete, but everything else was glistening metal, which took my breath away. Dim lights shone down on 3 metallic structures, clumsily built, but well enough to look like a real craft of some sort. It was like something from a sci-fi movie. They were in 3 colors, pink, blue, and green. Humanoid structures towering over me. I blinked, tearing my gaze from whatever project my teacher had been working on in his spare time. Whatever I was looking at could wait. I had to find the others. I risked using my voice in a whisper, scanning the room. "Hello?" I hissed. "Is anyone down here?" I nearly jumped out of my skin when the structure next to me, the blue one, flashed suddenly. It hummed like it was powering up. I'd triggered it somehow. Voice activation, maybe? I ignored it and kept searching. There were empty boxes at the back of the room, as well as a door which looked like it led into an old bathroom. I was twisting the handle when the humming grew louder, and I could have sworn it sounded like a groan mixed with a yawn. "Cassandra?" The voice sent me twisting back around, my gaze going to the structure which was now powered on. "Oh, thank God!" Kai was talking, his cry filling up the room, but I couldn't see him anywhere. "You need to help us," he hissed. For some reason, I couldn't stop staring at the blue machine. It seemed to be flashing in sync with what he was saying. "Mr. Asher went fucking crazy and knocked me out. I don't know what he's done to me, but I woke up here. I can't fucking move, man. I think he's drugged me or something. Kai." I cut him off. Suddenly, it was so hard to breathe. My body was paralyzed, and I could sense my hands slowly moving to cover my mouth. The metallic thing in front of me had stopped flashing. I took a slow step backwards. "Where are you?" "What do you mean, where am I? I'm right in front of you. Are you blind, Cassie?" My brain was suddenly in full control of my body. I took a step forwards, and then another and another, until I was resting the palm of my hand on the thing's metallic shell, which hummed in response. "Hey, no touchy! Get me out of here! God, man, he's done something fucked up to me. Does he have me, tied down or something? I can't feel my legs or arms." I don't think words can describe what I felt at that moment. What I felt when I searched the room further, when I pulled open the mysterious door and found a toilet leaking bright red, and what my teacher had tried to stuff down it. I was screaming, and I couldn't stop myself. I didn't care that I might get caught, that I might freak Kai out. I couldn't fucking stop. My hands were over my ears, and I was begging it to be a nightmare. It had to be. It had to be, right? But Mr. Asher's words from class were haunting the back of my mind, and all it took was looking at the teacher's project to understand what the man had meant. What is the most important part of an aircraft? "The pilot," Kai Oliver had answered. "Would you ever pilot a plane, Kai?" The teacher's voice rang in my head. Looking at shiny metal structures in front of me, I came to the realization that Kai was the pilot. He was the pilot, I thought, thinking about what was stuffed down the toilet, what spattered the walls and floor. I only saw half a torso and slimy pink and red before I backed out of there and heaved up everything in my gut. I couldn't leave him, leave them. I didn't look at the metal thing with Kai's voice. I looked at the old wooden door hiding his remains, which our teacher had failed to hide. "Kai?" I spoke softly, gently, so he wouldn't freak out. "I'm gonna get all of you help, okay?" "What?" His tone grew frightened. No, Cassie, don't leave me here. I can't move." Tears filled my eyes. "You're right," I said. He drugged you. You're in a bad state right now." My stomach lurched when his sob rang out, tinged with something robotic, something humming on the edge. "I think something bad has happened to me," he whispered. I can see you, but I can't see myself. Am I okay, Cassie? The majority of Kai Oliver was in the bathroom, while the rest of him towered over me. I took another step back, my breath thinning. You're fine, I bit out. I promise, I'll get you guys out of here. The metal thing flashed. Okay, Kai sighed. Just hurry up, okay? I've got a test due on Monday, and fuck, I still need to finish my Yale application. He groaned, and the structure moved slightly, its twitching arm jolting. Man, I got so much work to do. It sucks that asshole chose the busiest week of my life to decide to kidnap and keep me in his fucking basement. Kai was humming to himself when I left him. I left Mr. Asher and called the police, pushing past the detective who stepped in front of me. What's in there, kid? I didn't reply, focusing on what I was saying to the cops in hysterical shrieks which racked my chest. When I spoke to the lead officer, calmly trying to explain what I'd seen, I knew someone would help them. Someone would get them out of there. I waited for the report. I waited for the cops to storm my teacher's house and pull out his filthy secret. Except that is not what happened. They stormed his house, but they only found him locked in the bathroom. According to them, there were no metal monsters in the basement, and I was arrested for attempted murder. It all makes a sick kind of sense. For reasons out of my knowledge, this fucking town is protecting my teacher, in the past and present. Mr. Asher dropped the charges when my mom begged him, but when they dared put me in front of him, I couldn't help myself. I screamed at him over and over again. Why? I asked him, and I didn't stop screaming it at him until I was dragged out. It's been 3 months. I didn't bother with college. I'm still trying to get in that fucking house. I'm still waiting for his bad intention to show up. And when it does, I'll be ready. I'll show the town, and this time they won't be able to cover it up. I will show them what my teacher did. And I'll get them out of there, whatever's left of them, whatever's powering those things. I promise you, Kai, I will get you out. Some evil is so strong that you can not only feel it, but see it.